That's pretty funny.
All right, so Spoon is on his way in very soon. So I think we should start. There's one visitor. Would you like to introduce yourself? You didn't bring any crocheting. No crocheting or knitting today.
Yeah, I do have it.
It's just in the bag.
Did you have anything specific you wanted to address? Okay. So then we could move on to approval of the agenda, the minutes, and the warrants.
So moved.
Seconded?
All in favor? Aye.
So you didn't ask for discussion, but I will tell you that we're
Oh,
trying
yes,
to do,
discussion.
we're trying to do payroll differently, so it's going to be all on one sheet. Each time it will come, you should initial the, thank you, Van. You should just initial next to it after, hoping to save some paper that way.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Are we gonna do the same thing with health insurance? 'Cause
Not yet, but, you know.
it's the same, similar health
Roman
insurance
today.
dental. Okay, so now with that side note, are we all approving the agenda, the warrants, and the minutes?
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
aye, aye. We're good.
I'm sorry, can I just ask a question about this?
Yeah.
So each column is for one board member,
That's how the other boards have set it up, so.
and then we don't need to initial these ones that we already approved at the other meetings, just starting with the
Correct.
1027 one?
That's what we're thinking,
Okay.
yeah. If I'm incorrect, I'll bring it back and you can sign
We'll do
above,
it all
but.
over.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
Where's the spoon?
so the first thing up is EES Policy Council, and Deb is not here. Do you have enough to go? Because I know she's been in communication with emails that I've just forwarded on to you guys today. Do you feel ready, or do you want to push that until Deb comes?
We probably should wait. The
Yeah.
only thing I'm certain of is that because we had our meeting at the same time, the
Right.
policy council did, is that the policy council, you
Did
know,
approve.
approved our action. Yeah, and there's been a series of conversations since then about how to structure it and
Yeah,
how
so
to do
let's,
snacks and all
all
that.
right, let's
you know.
get Deb when she's here
Yeah.
then. Energy Committee is not meeting.
No.
We always have this on. Act 46, and I think we could probably move this to a committee report as opposed to unfinished business, maybe, I don't know. But obviously, the study committee report is tonight, starting at 6:30 after our meeting. And then the Alternative Governance Subcommittee, have you met since last Wednesday when we met?
No,
No. There we go. Anything else you want to say on it?
no, just waiting.
Finance Committee,
I was not at that meeting last week,
and Frank is coming soonish, so we'll see.
and I'm sure we're going over the budget, so I'm sure we can,
Yeah,
Okay.
that will be
yep.
what the finance committee really discussed
It was
last Wednesday.
grants and maybe WSESU last week, next week it's special ed.
And are they also discussing the thing we had asked for, like a written delineation of the roles of the executive committee?
I suspect it'll depend on how much time is spent each meeting on budget, because this time of year, every meeting, there's a different area of the budget that they look at.
Okay,
So it may be a few weeks.
until that comes
Until
up
we're
to
back,
yeah.
priority.
I know when I emailed Frank last week that I would not be there, I did tell him that the Brattleboro Town School Board is looking to get a list.
Okay.
So he is aware that that is what we
Okay,
want.
that's one of the
So-
things on there,
Yes.
list of things to do.
Yes.
Well, it's good, Robin, to not lose that. I'm wondering where we put that in our, maybe if we just leave it hanging in unfinished business, and then eventually we'll.
I mean, as right now, it's just the finance committee, we could just check in when that committee reports back.
Do you
if
remember
was
that?
discussed yet.
Well, and I'll try,
I can-
and
okay.
I'll try to remember
I just
too,
like
so.
that. If I don't put it on the agenda, it's a slip.
Between
Okay.
Robin and I, we should have it covered.
All right.
All right, diversity. Is there anything on diversity to report?
No, I mean, the committee meets on second Wednesdays, so
Okay.
by the next meeting, I will report back what was said, and I know Michaela's gonna be back from her leave then, so it should be a good meeting.
So then that moves us on to administrative reports. Jerry, you want to go
Sure.
first?
We go there before I
Just,
maybe.
That's a couple things there, this way. Can we pass the pressures one more?
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, but this is
No, I didn't
not
save copy for this.
under school things right now.
And here's Green Street coming too. Kim, did you send me that?
Yes.
Thank you. Second.
I've got a haircut.
Right here.
It helps. Thank you.
Do we have one for Academy right now too, Kelly? Which one
I
has
do.
at the same time? We seem to do well if all papers come at one time.
There you go,
There's
there's
extras.
extras.
There's an extra for me to ask.
I always have to write on here, Oak Grove.
Yeah, can you sometime write on, Jerry, can you have them write on yours, Oak Grove somewhere in the header?
Oh, yeah. Is it not there?
That's probably in.
I don't know if Academy has it either, but.
Academy
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
Oh,
So we'd get there eventually, process of
Oak
elimination.
Grove, huh?
We still need to get Academy onto the same headers.
Well, you can find us, we're the smallest, the 141 maybe.
Right, you can figure it out by looking at the first statistic.
That's true.
Illuminate.
But I do apologize, yes, we'll take care of that. So, yes, October, probably, because we've met so often, I don't have a whole lot of new things to report. This week, we've been really busy getting prepared for 2 different visits and assessments. Today was the integrated field review team that is part of the Agency of Education. I don't know if Lyle's going to talk about that more, but visitors that were coming, really many of our peers from Southern Vermont schools coming into our various schools. So we were getting ready for that visit to meet with students and teachers and parents and just really kind of
Why do we do this?
see our school.
Mandated
It's-
thing?
yeah. It's new. Last year there was a pilot year, this year it's new. So that's part of my report.
That's, yeah, that's right. But then also, separate from that, on Friday, so we have 2 days, and then on Friday, we partnered, if you recall, with SWIFT last year. So SWIFT stands for School-Wide Integrated Framework for Transformation, yes, of schools, transforming schools. And it's really looking at your MTSS practices, your inclusion practices for behavior as well as academics. And they look at the different components that they look at as administrative leadership, multi-tier systems of supports, integrated educations, and that is like our inclusion practices, family engagement, and inclusive policy overall for the entire SU. When we first partnered with them last year, one of the first things that they do is they do a fit assessment, which is like a field team comes in and they meet with, again, a whole host of groups and ask a slew of questions. And then we receive a report that looks something like this. And I will have all this data when we do the data review in January for you. But this was what like our up and down data looked like at our first fit. So SWIFT has lost their grant as part of the AOE in Vermont. The district has applied for an individualized grant that we're hoping so that we can continue with our work. But we don't know what that's going to look like yet. But we had to do a follow-up fit assessment. So they're coming back on Friday, asking the same questions, and we'll see what how our chart looks a year from
So
now.
does that chart look bad or good? What is it?
Well, that's what I said. It's like, well, I have some that are down like in the 40 percentile and, and 33 for organizational system. Is that, and how SWIFT works with you is it's to not look at it as being good or bad. These are like baselines, and where are we going from there? So we then took this information. They helped us to draft our school-wide action goals around inclusive policies, around universal design learning and professional development. As if we're going to hopefully, push towards having more students with various needs in a classroom, then how do we accommodate them? How do we do modified academic support for those students in the classroom, and then providing some extra tiered instruction outside of the classroom. And so that's the work that we've been working on. Some of our other goals related to kind of restructuring our committee work to make it so that you didn't have just these isolated committees, that the committees were actually kind of made sense with how we were structuring our work, and then they would be able to talk to each other a little bit more. We looked at our schedule and revamped our schedule a little bit more this year for our 4-6 team especially, so that it can, again, offer more of a multi-tiered philosophy.
Sherry, I missed something along the way, some big part of like, what is the SWIFT program or the process? Is it targeting specific kids, or is it tied
It's
to the
transforming
quality standards? It's just, I kind of think I
It's
know,
about
but I'm
school,
not
it's
sure.
really around school systems. It's not targeting individual students at all. It's really around being able to look at your school and what kind of systems and structures do you have in place to kind of get the work done.
Right, because I understood all those individual things, but I didn't know
Yeah.
what was holding together. Thanks. That's-
Yeah.
It's a good question, David. I was thinking too, transforming schools for what? What are we, I mean, the name of it was like,
Do you want me to look up the name?
no, you said.
Sometimes I think they
School-wide
just get more
integrated
excited about making
framework
a
for
cool
trans-
acronym
Yeah.
than about something that actually explains the thing.
Yeah.
So the idea about transforming is to, again, not just, so you're looking at some of your low areas, and then as a school team, we met with our SWIFT consultants throughout the year, and then that work then would go into our large faculty meeting conversations, and we would discuss that, okay, this is low, but does low necessarily mean it's a priority for us? What really do we feel is a priority? So you can have low scores in certain areas that could be in organizational system, for example. And then there's a whole host of questions around organization that came out of organizational system. But the thing about the fit assessment that Swift talked to me about is that you can miss one thing. There might be one thing that we don't do, and so the entire category is a 0 for us. Even though it might, do I collect lesson plans from all my teachers? And if I don't do that, that's a 0, and then we go back as a school and we discuss, is that a priority? What do we hope, what would we gain from that? Would we gain anything from that? Or would it be better that we're making time to meet with our vertical teams, sharing lessons, and doing some of the professional development to make sure that our lessons are aligned with supporting all kids that are in the classroom?
Okay.
So anyway, that's happening on Friday, and I think everything else, that was, for me,
That's happening along with the
that's
field
happening
review.
along with the other, yes, so,
We're really looking at Oak Grove close.
I got,
And in between, you try to teach.
What Jerry did say is they did Mix It Up Day yesterday at lunch, and that was really fun. I got to go over and spend some lunch times in Oak Grove, and the leadership team did a good job planning that and helping kids find a different table to sit at, and it was fun. And you were recognized for it nationally, correct?
last year,
Yeah.
One quick question I always have on these reports, and I don't remember you've answered before. As we look at this, is the number 2 for the DCF PD safety checks, is that 2 since the last report or 2 total per year? How did you guys all do that?
this, I fill it out by the month.
Yes, Andy too?
I thought it was by the month.
3 for the month and then 3 total.
Well, DCF reports us,
Separate.
yeah, 3.
3/3 means 3 this month of 3 total for the year?
Right. Yep. Well, I can tell you we've added to that significantly.
But then it can't be that, if it's 10 over 7, so it's 10 for the month, wouldn't it be 17 for the year at least, or is it?
Well, 10 total, 7 this month, so there were
So it's
3
The second
in,
number is how many
3 in
this month?
September, right?
Okay.
So there were, there's 4 DCF reports. There's been 3 for the year and 3 this month, so there were none in September.
So maybe if you guys could all put it the same way, just, I think it's good to have that running
Running total,
total.
Sure.
Kind of, I don't know.
we just said.
So put an annual number and then slash, and then how many were for this
We'll,
month? Like
we'll
how-
write it out, annual, monthly annual.
Annual and then monthly.
Some
Daily,
of us have a
hourly.
harder time telling us.
Can you hear that? Sir?
Surprise!
It's
It's all set.
all.
Everybody's signed.
I said, Jerry, are we,
No, I didn't.
are you ready for us to move on, or did you have?
Yeah, no, I'm,
other things?
no, I'm good, thank you.
You're good?
I didn't take so much
She needs to
time.
go.
Needs to go into.
No, I apologize.
All right,
Makes
so
us
that
all
takes
check.
us, Andy, to you. Was it you or Kelly tonight?
Kelly.
Kelly, you're on.
Right, even though he's got clean teeth. So we've had a really fun week. Yesterday, we had our annual pumpkin event.
Oh, yeah.
Classrooms and staff created displays with pumpkins. The theme was bring your favorite book to life. So everyone had a book along with their display. We had some guest judges from the community come through. And,
Who won?
well, the office had a second place. We had 3 categories. It was staff, and then there was a K to 3 and a 4 through 6. So I think 2nd grade won, the lower grades, and 6th grade, Mr. Ford's class.
Actually, it was Miss Lorraine's class that won for the
Oh,
lower grades.
right, that's true. 2nd grade came in second.
Let's get.
1st grade came in first.
It might have been someone who was.
I think somebody's child might be.
Yes.
Just coincidental.
Had nothing to do with the voting by the outside community members.
Hence why she
But it was really fun. Everyone enjoyed it, and the K through 2nd graders had a parade just around our parking lot in the church and back inside, and everyone came out and cheered for them. So that was a nice event. Let's see. On November 8th, we have our final family breakfast for the fall for grades 4 through 6. And following that breakfast, we are doing a parent community event with a Eureka Math presentation in the library from 8:30 to 9. So parents have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about our curriculum and how it's taught. We've got a lot of new strategies and methods, and parents are asking frequently how to help their children at home, so we're hoping to help them with that. And we're hoping it'll be well attended because it's following the breakfast. And we've got our performance of Miss Twiggly's Tree coming up. That's the lower grades play. So that will be November 16th from 6 to 7 p.m. and the 17th during the school day. There's 2 shows at 9 and at 10.
And is that the Brattleboro, or is that Academy or the Brattleboro wide New England Youth Theater?
That's just Academy, yeah. Yep. And, one last thing is this Friday, grade 5 is going to BUHS with Judith Palmieri, our school counselor, to do a social competency workshop, all about leadership, decision-making. So they always come back with a lot of great ideas from that. Did you have anything else, Andy?
No, that's great.
Mark?
Okay, on the front page, we've had some movement in the building through the month of October. We've had 4 new students that we've taken in at Green Street, and we've had 1 student move away to Colorado. Under student programming, after-school program is really up and running and flourishing right now. So we're excited about our fall offerings. On the back side, I'd like to again acknowledge, I think at the last meeting, I acknowledged that our Green Street spelling team won the town spelling bee competition. Well, last weekend they won the regional competition. So for the 2nd year in a row, they'll be headed to the state championship on, I think, November 18th is the weekend. So David Berkson Harvey, Thomas Hyde, Sylvie Land, and Evan Wagner have been putting in a tremendous amount of work at their craft. So very proud of them, and Alice Sharks has been their coach for a couple of years now. Winter sports registrations are going home today. Attached to my report is are the offerings that we're offering this year. We have a ton of offerings this year, so we're really excited about the program. 6 choices for kids in grades 4 through 6, and 6 choices for kids in grades 1 through 3. So we've also chosen to extend winter sports to a 5-week program this year. We've been 4 weeks for the past couple of years, but we're excited to move that to a 5-week program. And I think we got some really creative opportunities that we're going to offer our families. We've established a new homework policy this year. We're essentially, aside from 6th grade, we're just focusing on reading at home. So to encourage more participation and some excitement around that, what we're doing is every week, students, when they fill out their reading logs, they turn them into the library. Our librarian, Ms. Shannon, takes that reading log, turns it into a raffle ticket, and puts it into a raffle bin. So each week that you participate and do your weekly reading, you get a ticket that goes into the raffle bin. And then the last school sing of each month, we do a drawing, and we draw a student from K2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and those 3 students whose names get drawn get to take a walking field trip downtown. Ms. Shannon, our librarian, will take them to everyone's books. We're going to buy them a book of their choice, and everyone's books has donated certificates. And then Brattleboro has also supplied us with a number of gift certificates for a free cheeseburger. So they'll have a night out, not a night, an afternoon on the town with a free cheeseburger and book to complement their hard work around reading. Under school-wide events, we also had a mix-it-up day yesterday through our restorative justice team, and that was focused on the 3rd and 4th grades. We had an integrated field review today, like Oak Grove and Academy. Kelsey Manwaring organized the day for us and is a participant in that review, and it was a really great day. As I think you can tell from last week, we're really proud of our development and where we are as a school, and we were able to kind of show off in person the things that we tried to portray in the slideshow last week. So that was really good. And just a couple other things. As you know, we've had the McDonald's donation come in from their opening sales.
Was that a percentage of that?
It was a 10% percentage of their opening 3-day sales.
$6,000.
$6,000.
Wow. Incredible.
So that was presented to the school a couple of school sings ago. And essentially what I've decided is I'm literally turning that check over to the student senators. And then it's going to be their task to develop a project that'll better, the framework is that'll better enhance everybody's daily experience at the school. So the student senators, there's no timetable. They have the whole school year. They'll be working with the whole school to develop a way to utilize this money to enhance our school experience. And then just a final note, parent-teacher conferences for all of us coming up next week on November 8th and 9th.
So it occurs to me when I look at this, Mark, I like all the community involvement with Brattleboro and everyone's books and McDonald's, and then in the winter sports, it looks like you've got a lot of different places too like that. Are they reaching out to you or you to them?
Both.
Good.
The more you reach out, you find the more people come and reach out to you. So it's been a bit of both.
Okay.
Yes, all right.
So, as you've heard, we've had our integrated field review today, and I think I talked with you about it earlier in the summer at our retreat possibly. But there are a number of schools in southern Vermont that are in the process this year of teams of teachers, teams of educators going into the school, looking at everything from teaching practices, curriculum, assessment. They spent the day at central office, so they interviewed me, I think they interviewed Frank, they talked about our hiring practices. I'm not sure what they talked with Frank about the budget, but they looked at lots of different areas. They went to every single school in Wyndham Southeast. They are actually meeting right now, putting together their recommendations and commendations. We won't get them officially for a few weeks, but when they get them to us, we will share them with you. Everything that I've heard, they've been pretty impressed with how together we are as a supervisory union. And I think that's something that we focused on the last number of years, that if it's good for one school, then we need to think that it's probably good for all schools, and we need to work together on that. So that was today. I need to thank Julianne Egan and Paul Smith. They really organized everything, and then there was a point person at each school. So it sounds like Kelsey at Green Street, I don't know who.
Catherine Mason.
Catherine Mason and
Eric Cummings
And Eric.
here. Yeah, he really spent a lot of time going through schedules to see when teachers had specials so they could participate in interviews. It was really,
Yeah.
but a lot of time.
a lot of times
Yeah.
come into it. And that team has also gone out to other schools in the area. So we've had people that have gone to Mill River, a team that's gone to Wyndham Northeast. I know there's a team that's going to Windsor. So, and maybe Springfield is the other place. So they're also going out and doing the same thing in other areas that we had with us today, so.
So I missed, who's on the integrated field team, or did I?
It's a variety. It's teachers, it's administrators, one of the people.
teachers from here or all around?
All
Southern
around. There are
Vermont?
no teachers from here visiting our schools. Our teachers that are on the team are going out to other schools.
And then how does the information come back to our,
Well, they have a format that's online that they are actually, we build into the day, so from 3:30 to 5:30, they're right now working together. The team that's in WSESU working together right now, pulling together those statements. It goes to the agency of ed, I don't know what they do, and then they send it back to
so
us.
when it's all done, you'll get reports on what's
Things that they-
exciting
yep,
that's going
yep.
on here, but also around the state?
Yep, that's a good question. I don't know. We'll hear what's happening like at Mill River.
I mean, what's the point of this?
It's a way that other educators in the area are looking at what we're doing and giving us some suggestions about what they've seen. Possibly, have you thought of maybe trying this in a certain area? Or this looked really good. For instance, one of the things I know that's really good is our assessment plan. It is SU-wide, we've worked on it, we update it all the time, and people want to copy that because it is so complete and together. So that's one of the things that I'm certain will be a commendation for us.
But it's based on, they're here to see if we're addressing the education
Quality
quality
standards.
standards. That's the bottom of what they're
Though
looking
there
at.
are no penalties either, so
It
it's.
seems like it's sort of a more global version of what Mark was talking about last week, where they have teachers from the same grade level come in and observe and then say, oh, what's that person doing that I could do in my class? And also give them a critique. This is sort of like the SU version of that same process,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, and it's like a peer, like what Mark was talking about, it's a peer review, basically.
Right,
So-
but when we do it, like what Mark was talking about, then the teachers at Green Street were learning from one another. That's why I was trying to figure out who was learning from whom, I guess.
I think the teachers that go out learn, but then we all will be able to look at what they've recommended and commended us on, so everybody in WSESU will do.
The final reports are not school-specific, they're SU-related. So the report we get will be a collaboration of everything that was observed in the WSESU schools. So we won't get like a specific academy recommendation or Green Street or Oak Grove, but more of a holistic, how are we looking as an SU?
Last year, I don't know if you remember, we were audited for our Title I parent involvement. We got a notification today that pleased to report that our actions that we are required to do are completed and accepted. But I do want to read the last paragraph. We want to commend the supervisory union's CFP team leader, Paul Smith, for his diligent work in both organizing and submitting all the required documentation. So it's really nice to have Paul recognized for the work that he does with Telegram. And the last thing, and we might need to say this a couple of times, in the Brattleboro Reformer, it talks about the Act 46 meeting tonight, and then it also says November 5th at Guilford, and it is not November 5th. November 5th is a Sunday. It's November 6th at Guilford Central School. So we may need to announce that a couple of times tonight, just so that people know that there's not going to be anybody at Guilford School on November 5th. Well, if they are, they're not talking about Act 46.
So Deb, I think we'll grab you, because we've just gone around for the administrative report. So we skipped policy council, and it's time for your administrative report anyway, because we thought you might have the latest and greatest details that David might not, because he was at the last meeting with us instead of the policy council.
Okay, so I'll do both together. We did have policy council, and we had a couple of visitors, a couple of potential new members. We're going to be voting in new members in November, and we have a couple of community reps who may be joining, but we have to be really careful about the balance so that we're not over 49% community reps versus 51% current parents. And I think part of the reason why we had more of a robust meeting was, of course, the discussion we had about moving to double sessions in Westminster. And that was a very thorough conversation, a very difficult conversation for the council, and they certainly did understand, we looked at all the possible options, and they did agree with the one that I recommended to the board, which was to move into double sessions effective on November 6th. Again, this is temporary, hopefully, until we can find 3 teachers. We were bombarded with applications in the last few days from parents who want to be subs in hopes of becoming teachers, and that's a whole process, but they're really, wanting to remedy this problem as soon as possible, even to the point of becoming possible teachers themselves. So we'll move into double sessions on Monday, or it's effective November 6th. The parents preferred to be operating from Tuesday to Friday. We had talked here about Monday through Thursday, and I felt like that was fine. That was, whatever worked best for them. And I have been fielding some calls from our family support specialist, who is focused in that community, to look at possible requests that parents have asked, such as they have a child that's 3 years old, and typically that child would be going in the morning, and they also have a child in the early Head Start classroom next door, so could they switch? And so we're trying to make it work as best we can for all the parents. The hours will be from 8:30 to 12, in the morning, and then a break from 12 to 12:30, and then 12:30 to 4 in the afternoon. Both groups will be led by our 3 teachers, all very qualified. They will all receive lunch, so there'll be a lot of food serving in this time. The morning children will receive a light morning, or a morning breakfast, probably cereal and fruit, something like that, and then a full lunch, and the afternoon children will get lunch and a snack. This has been discussed with the regional office. There's been communication back and forth about that. We're not alone. There are many other programs that are struggling with the staffing shortage. So that was a great part of the conversation, a great amount of the time that we had at Policy Council. And then it was business as usual, and actually getting excited about bringing on a new board. So hopefully, right now the board is heavily laden with representatives from Westminster, and really not too many from Canal Street, often we have none, and that's very different from what it's been in years past. So we're hoping that we can recruit some new folks from this community and have a better representation across the board. And so as you can imagine, most of the work that has been happening at EES is revolving around making the necessary changes to accommodate this shift. And I'm gearing up for the refunding application. It is scheduled for submission on December 1st. I did ask for an extension, and I'm fairly confident that we'll have that so that I can gather all the information that I need in light of this most recent change. We're not recommending that we continue that, but there's lots of documentation they're asking to support why we, what the community needs are and how we might continue to address our under-enrollment problem, which is still, actually, right now it's okay, but I expect that this double session might actually increase the under-enrollment problem, but we'll see. So far, no one has left, so that's pretty much what I've been up to for the last few weeks.
And this is probably a dumb question, but is there anything that, like the Antioch program that Academy has done, where students are actually able to work doing their internships but receiving pay? Is there anything like that that we could look at?
We have, I should have brought it, we have an extensive list of initiatives that we're either sponsoring ourselves or involved in to recruit teachers, and we do have interns from Antioch occasionally. I think we actually have one now. And we actually have, I think I've mentioned this here, we've reinstated our assistant teacher position with the idea that we can bring folks in and actually train them and help them become qualified to be hired as teachers. And we provide the college credit courses. We actually sponsor those through our training budget. So, and there are many other initiatives. So we're not turning a blind eye to any opportunity that's out there.
What I liked about the Antioch program particularly is that there's, if I'm a student and I'm having to pay, and I'm assuming that there's people getting early ed degrees around too.
Not too many, and that's the problem.
Doesn't pay so bad.
Yeah, that's a definite. I don't pretend to have a lot of answers that you wouldn't, or any answer that you wouldn't have already thought of.
Well,
Threw it out.
but, we like to hear any and all suggestions, so.
When you mentioned that there are substitutes who are interested in becoming lead teachers to help alleviate this problem, is that something that they would need more college courses to be able to do that?
So they can't become a lead teacher. A lead teacher requires a bachelor's degree.
Okay.
But in order to become a teacher, actually an assistant teacher, that's what I was talking about.
That's what they felt like they wanted to
So
become.
they would need one course, one early childhood course, 3-credit course, and a course that's offered through the state, and it's called Fundamentals of Early Childhood. So as a sub, they don't need that, but if they're, as a sub, they're considered an employee. And so then we can hook them into those courses and actually pay for them.
But so you have already money in your budget where
Correct.
you can pay for those courses and then?
Yes, we actually sponsor them, we actually teach the courses.
Oh,
Maureen Young and I both teach for CCV, so
oh, okay.
we're pulling out all the stops, we don't
Yeah.
want any barriers.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have a shortage in lead teachers too?
Mhm.
Is there, I'm just wondering about this actually as both to alleviate staffing problems in general, and also I know that, it's much easier to get people who already live here to work for the schools than to try and attract people from far away, but I was just wondering if that's something that the schools have ever done either to try to, is there any kind of budget where they fund schooling for community members to become teachers?
But it's in, if you were a substitute or whatever, like she's saying, it's in
Yeah.
there.
They do have that for elementary substitutes as well?
No,
You know,
no, just at the EES.
I mean, there's a lot more, you can't jump and just take a couple classes and then be a teacher in the town schools, but I was just wondering if there was any way that we could possibly sponsor like a bachelor's degree for someone to become qualified to actually be a classroom teacher.
And the thought for why you wanna do that is just to help people move into
Well,
that
as there's
position,
such
or
a
is
like
it would-
staffing shortage and
I think the
with
staffing
attracting
shortage-
candidates and also for diversifying the staff, if we could try and make that a path to employment for people that already live here instead of having to attract people from like South Carolina or whatever.
So we do that at EES, they can get a bachelor's on our dime.
Yeah. So you could really start in at EES and actually end up moving up into, and some people have done that over
One
the years.
course at a time, one course per semester, we will
Oh,
take
okay.
up to a bachelor's.
Okay, so that would be a long-term
Yes.
goal for someone that was gonna, I'll work here many years and eventually get my bachelor's, I see.
So Jerry just reminded me that para-educators have a certain amount of money that they could use for a course,
Okay,
so they could.
so that's a similar structure as what Deb's talking about.
but as a para, in the state of Vermont, it's required that you have a 2-year, an associate's degree or what equivalency to a 2-year
Okay,
degree.
but for people who maybe wanted to complete their bachelor's while working as a para, they could do that, then slowly.
Well, it's a pool.
It's a pool.
It's a pool in Bradtown, I think it's $2,500, or $2,000 or $2,500. And it's a first come, first serve. I think the maximum individual hit is 300.
So
Per
it's
year?
one course.
Right, so one can apply, there's a pool of amount of money, one can apply. I think it's capped at around 300. Don't quote me on the numbers, because I haven't dealt with this for several months now, but there's a cap so that it only is available at $300 per person, for example.
Right, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sorry, it's been a long time, but can you buy a tuition to a college course for $300?
No, it's not intended,
It's like supplementing,
exactly, it's not intended to do what you're suggesting.
Okay.
It's a gesture with a little bit of money behind it.
okay, just to kind of make another perk of being a para,
And
more
are
than
we,
like
Become
a
better
path
trained.
to.
Better treatment, yeah.
and do we have paras, does that money disappear every year because so many people are
Doesn't
trying?
Bradtown.
And do we have a lot of paras who are trying to become teachers eventually?
Usually, in my experience, and it may be different in the other schools, but in my experience, the paras who are becoming teachers, we've hired already with their degrees. And they need experience, and so they come in with a degree and then they work as a para for a year or two. And there's an opening and they jump into the opening. We have a para now who had worked for us for a couple years as a para, and now is teaching first grade in Guilford. And for us, she was subbing for our maternity leave as a para, and that was a great step, para to a long-term sub, and then got hired in Guilford as a first grade teacher right now.
We currently have a special ed para who's working on her special ed degree, so it's kind of like an internship with Keene State College. So at the end of her internship, and she's getting paid, she'll have a special ed teaching degree, so theoretically she can start to apply for special ed positions in June.
So that's kind of like the Antioch one where
At a smaller scale, yeah.
they're getting an internship, but it's also it's a paid internship.
Right,
And you hired a third grade teacher who was a para here.
that's right. Yep.
Had a degree, came here as a para, worked here for a year, and then Mark Carter.
Spoon had something?
Is there, I'm not sure, Lyle, you might be, is the State Department of Employment here aware, do they get a regular list, a monthly list or something like that from the supervisory union of every position that's available?
Not to my knowledge, no. And
Would you, can you think offhand, is there any reason that, for instance, even just starting out, both the town and the supervisory union working together to produce a monthly list of offerings in the municipal arena and
When
school?
you say offerings, you're talking about job
Yeah,
openings?
yeah, just job openings on the municipal and school side as a combined sheet. Now,
Well,
all the other
they're-
details
They're on
aside.
the websites, right? Both of them would be on the website for anybody who goes to look for that.
I mean, on each website.
Yeah.
So who would know? I'm thinking, we all deal with poverty here, and it's serious, and our residents need jobs. So it seems like we need to be doing a little more than posting something in an obscure place and saying it's there if someone looks for it, when a lot of people in poverty would never even think of knowing where to look, or feel like there's any point because they're qualified or unqualified or have any idea. So that's my point here.
Well, I think the town has a lot more different kinds of jobs that people could be accessing that maybe had different levels and different kinds of qualification, but for working for the schools, it's such a high level and specific kind of qualification that I don't get the impression that there's a bunch of people sitting around the town of Brattleboro that are licensed teachers that are like,
No, I don't mean
how do
to.
I find these jobs?
Well, I'm listening to Deb here talk about
Oh, yes, okay.
what they need for, just to come in and be a sub at early ed,
Right,
which is
okay.
a start.
Doing a different
And then from there, and there's a lot of jobs, Public Works needs somebody in the summer to rake leaves in the park. But it's just some way to get aware and into,
There's no jobs board around here for situations like that.
well, that's what it seems. I mean,
Yeah.
I was never
Which is
aware
a
of one
real bad
except if someone ends up in the state employment agency, is it. And if they don't end up there, or they're not there, or they're just hopeless and they don't go, they don't really hear.
So the EES jobs, though, are posted as part of the WSESU website, right?
Yes.
I would assume.
So our constituents are very tech savvy, poverty or not. And Indeed.com is where they go, or they go to the School Spring, and they know that, that's common knowledge. We advertise in the paper, but it's not much real, it's all technology. And we have our new website that's coming out, and we have our job openings posted on that. A lot of word of mouth.
We posted for substitutes 2 years ago, and we got 2 applicants from posting in the Brattleboro Reformer.
Which
People-
could mean that nobody's interested,
Or
or far
vacancies.
fewer people than you realize are actually aware of those postings.
or far fewer people are looking for jobs.
Okay.
Or the
Of
read the
that
paper.
kind.
Or they read the paper.
Yeah.
I know, there are too
Yeah.
many,
I think
too
that
many variables.
A lot of the people that read the paper are past job age.
Yeah.
So, what we run into too is there's some pretty substantial requirements to work in a school, in a public school. And, our mission, well, we do, we are all about ending the cycle of poverty. But our mission is we do that by educating the kids. That's the only way that we can disrupt that cycle of poverty. And it's multi-generational, and education is the way we're gonna do it. but we're not going to disrupt that cycle of poverty through employment. Because the folks that we hire have to have, so, we're hiring white-collar workers who have to have some training. Even for paras, that's 2 years of college.
Well,
Subs, I think is there a requirement of college for subs? in
No.
the high
The
school?
issue
No.
with subs is that it's not a permanent job, it's
Right.
on call, and so I hear from my subs, I'd love to be on your list, but I have to have work every day in order to
Yeah.
get my childcare subsidy, so that I can put my child in childcare, and I can't do that if I don't have full-time work. So
Right.
that's the rub with being
Yeah,
a
you have to
sub.
sort of be in a little bit of a privileged situation to be able to
Yeah.
make your job be subbing and at the
yeah.
irregular nature of that.
And everybody, including substitutes, have to go through a background check. And that, for some people, is a barrier.
Okay, that's a bit,
But I
but
think rightly so.
that statement that you made, Andy, although you qualified it, comes across strikingly odd that we're not going to interrupt the cycle of poverty through employment.
We aren't as a school.
And of course, that is the only way that you interrupt the cycle of poverty.
I would disagree with you.
Except to just give people money.
Well, I think
I
What he's saying
Andy's
is,
point
this
was-
isn't the kind of employer that can do that, because the staff and faculty, by the fact that they became qualified for the job, would mean that they already had a big leg out of poverty if they ever were in it.
We have no idea who's out there. And when someone walks in looking for a job, you go through the process that you need to go through to make sure that they're qualified. That comes later. The first thing is, everybody needs to know about every job that there is,
Well, that's
so they have a chance to apply.
when
those-
we advertise, we get, many different resumes. And some of those resumes, they just go off to the side because they don't have the qualifications for
I
that
understand
job.
that.
But we do have people apply who don't have a teaching license, and thanks for applying, but sorry.
To kind of come back to where we started with the preschool, all of the $300 for the paras and the training that you do, and all these little things that everybody's trying to do are gestures to try and deal with the problem, because the importance of preschool is, everybody recognizes that, but in order to have it took 30 or more years to get universal kindergarten in Vermont. And now it's universal preschool. It'd be incredibly expensive, it really make a huge investment, which would be obviously valuable and repay itself thousands of times over in opportunity gains, but it's, we're putting little bits in to try and make it better. We've got one pre-K, we should have 8. Because everybody needs it.
So I think we can continue to think on any other ideas of getting the early education people is really the question that is the most urgent from what I'm hearing. But I was thinking maybe we'd move along in the agenda. We're on any other old business at this point, or unfinished business, and under other, one thing that came to me is the SBAC scores. We looked at, just briefly, we looked at some of yours at Green Street, but do we have it on our work plan to actually look at all of them at some point? And so I was looking at our work plan.
Well, December 6th, we worked on your percent academy, that is.
December 6th is Academy
Right. we're gonna-
entirely,
Well, we're gonna present, among other things, the SBAC scores.
but it was an Academy focused.
Yeah, I
Nice,
think that's how we're
right?
gonna do it this year. It sounded like we were gonna do, when we have our school focus meetings, but we
Okay.
would all bring in our
And so when
Academic
did
day.
we put Oak Grove down? 'Cause
That's in January.
the January 3rd or 17th?
So the 17th, I've confirmed the behavior discipline,
Yeah, 3rd.
so it's January 3rd.
January 3rd is at Oak Grove, or the Oak Grove, we're gonna go over PK and,
Okay.
yeah.
And so, I guess at some point, I still want to see a full review of all the SBAC scores from Green Street anyway, because we looked, unless I've forgotten, but Mark, I think we just looked at a couple classrooms, right? We really didn't look at any trends over the years, except for just a couple key classrooms, yes?
We looked at 2 different cohorts, right? But yeah, I can do that.
So I don't know whether it makes sense to just pass out some papers at some
Sure.
point, or maybe even wait until after Jerry and Andy get done so that we could have some sort of a cohesive look at all 3 schools.
Mhm.
All right, so that was, anybody else have any other old business or unfinished business?
One thing, well, maybe, for the November 15th curriculum overview, the Eureka and ECRI, I was wondering if we could, since Mark talked about it, or Mark's staff talked about social curricula that you use, and I wonder if we could add that to the overview. Just to describe what that is and how it works and how people use it.
The
I
15th, our next
I
one.
assume that everybody uses them.
I think they have different ones, right?
Well, how do we
That was
do that?
a different one that you named at yours than the second steps, which is I think what they use here, right?
November.
So is there a way in
Next
2 weeks to incorporate that part of our program as well in that report?
I think part of my presentation, I suggested that our counselor Tracy was
Yeah.
willing to provide further analysis into that slide, into some of the social curriculums that we're doing.
So maybe that's what you're asking for perhaps 10 minutes or something on
Yeah, I
each
mean, we're
school?
looking at, I mean, obviously, social curricula is
So
a
like
huge,
5 or 10
big part
minutes
of
from
what we
each
do.
school would be good? Maybe we could have her come in and present at that
Yeah,
meeting?
however, just so we and the public can get a sense of how we're working with the social skill needs of kids.
Okay.
Okay.
No, could you just clarify a little bit?
Oh, one more thing, I'm sorry.
She's wanting clarification
Just
from
clarification for the curriculum review and what it
The
is that you're
social
looking.
curriculum.
Well, I know, but I have curriculum review, so like, besides the social curriculum, what is the board looking for that evening?
I think what we talked about at the retreat, and I can look it up, but what we got on here was Eureka and ECRI, the new programs, and how they're being implemented. I think we got a sense of that last time from Mark's staff, but let's see if I can find those books.
Just video of it.
Yeah, I don't know that
Format
it's
to that?
an intensive type thing, right, Dave, that you're looking for?
I'm sorry?
Is it a long, intensive overview, or just kind of a quick, this is what it is and this is how it works?
I'm trying to find, well, what we talked about at the goals meeting was update on programming and changes. And we talked about,
I think you made the point, we've spent money investments in.
yeah, and we had new ones, and we've had new ones regularly, and it used to be, at least my first memory of the curriculum was so that it would align, so everybody would have the same background when they got to middle school. And I don't know if it's different now, but we've adopted some different programs, and it would be nice to know about what they do, why we use them, and what effect they
When you
have.
say program, do you, besides from social curriculum,
I mean, well, the specific things that came up were Eureka and ECRI. And I think there was a Reading Street and the New York Math, which may be the same thing.
Yeah.
But those were we hear a number of descriptions of programs.
I think David was also trying to kind of tie in the 1%, we've also had some investments in
Yeah.
that. I remember your comments, and so what have we done with those 1% fundings and days, and what sort of results are we getting from these curriculum changes, how do we feel about them? Might get,
Yeah.
is that what you're
And
reading?
the other, yeah. Does that make sense? Okay.
I don't know that it's a very long program here for us to be shown, but just kind of,
How much time are you
Well, so far
allocating?
on the agenda is budgets for whatever we have for this fall. I don't know, Frank, if November 15th, the next meeting, we're really ready to dive into a whole lot of budget things yet.
Right.
So we have budgets on there and then curriculum overview, and we don't have anything else on that meeting.
No, we could have a really robust look at
We have
curriculum.
EES down, I don't have it. You do? Do you have EES on yours too? Were you planning on presenting something?
Well, I think, no, we talked about, I gave you the link to look at the review for the,
So
so
that was it.
decided
So I think we
it
took
wasn't
off
necessary.
EES because she gave us the link and told us to do it on our own time.
Thank you.
That's what's on
And then the other thought about that, and for the January 17th, is do we want to do some outreach so that the public knows that we're going to be talking about the new curriculum? And I know the Academy's got a Facebook page, there's a parents webpage, and I forget the other one I recently saw, but they're, or not webpage, Facebook page.
For the November 15th page?
Yeah, for the curriculum this time, and then for the behavior.
I think the behavior one, for sure, we talked about how it would lay out, but I don't know if the curriculum one, we could certainly put it on there, that's what we're gonna discuss, but I didn't see that kind of so much as a presentation and forum that.
Well, it's going to be a
It's
presentation to us.
information
Yeah.
from you guys. Did you wanna advertise that as a, would it be particularly interesting to parents and such, or is that a different audience and a different presentation?
What if, can I just propose an idea? What if we hold that curriculum overview? Because I feel like we touched on that in our specific presentation. And then if we let Academy do their presentation, and then Oak Grove do theirs.
See
And then
what's left, so
kind
we
of
still
see
have
where
refreshments?
we are.
How do you feel about that, Dave?
We also have on the schedule, Kelly just pointed out, March 7th, we do have a dedicated day for the counselors for all 3 schools to come back to us.
And we can
So
include
that-
social curriculum there.
That could be
And I
maybe a
think we did
social
talk about the
curriculum.
social curriculum being there because people often talk about that in our presentation to town reps, so we wanted it to be relatively close so we could figure that out. How do you feel about that, David?
That's fine, yeah.
So then that means if we do that, I'll bring it down into mine and just put a question mark so we think about it. If we do that, then the only thing left on our next meeting's agenda is budget, and Frank is shaking his head that he doesn't think we're gonna have much to talk about yet. Yes?
Right, we put down together a budget planning schedule for Brattleboro Town, and let's see, we had, reviewing with the principals on the 15th, and then we had first draft for the board December 6th. So that's kind of similar to what we did last year too.
So the first time for the board is when?
December 6th. And we get the AOE statistics December 15th, so we'll certainly be looking at programs and staffing and operations, but we won't be able to translate that into tax rates and that sort of thing until after December 15th.
So, November 15th now has nothing on for an agenda. Is that okay with people?
Is there anything that's like squished up on upcoming dates that we could move up? Dates that seem crowded with a lot of items that aren't waiting for something specific first?
The Oak Grove report,
That was January 3rd, that's
January
along with the
3rd.
pre-K.
so January, Oak Grove could move up to November 15th and then we'd be the end of October.
Next week?
No.
Well,
I don't think they'd be ready, no, that's,
No.
That's what I was gonna say, is that's not
that's
very
2
much
weeks,
notice.
that's not.
I'm asking.
Well, now we know.
Robin and I are telling you. Thank you.
I mean, whatever Jerry feels, if she's
Yeah.
like, I can do it in 2 weeks,
I
let's
saw
go.
the look in her eyes, I'm gonna say no.
Just- No?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'd rather not.
so then the only thing I think that's on there is, whatever happens with the Act 46 vote and regular administrative reports.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll probably have a
I'm
lot to
just
talk
sure
about
something
after
will
this
come
vote.
up.
So I'm going to cancel Paul and Brian for the 15th, because we're not doing it.
Right.
Okay,
One thing we could, and I'm not suggesting we have a meeting simply to talk about it, but we could talk about the memo from the secretary about how we should approach budgeting and what we should be thinking about.
Well, let's make sure we bring that into the budgeting.
Right.
And we've all looked at that memo, right?
Mhm.
We
Well,
looked at that here.
We've all seen it, I don't know if everybody has read it.
Well, I mean, I think we could definitely discuss it at the meeting because there's not going to be much going on. So it'll be a good thing to discuss before we get into the crux
So on
of
November 15th.
of the whole budget.
Yeah.
Discuss memo from Rebecca Holt. Okay,
See, we added something.
of course we did. I was proposing in my head that we not meet, but gee, that would be terrible.
We get a very brief meeting.
Yes.
Do you send these updates to Barb,
I guess I will. Yes.
just so she can?
And I sent it last time to everybody. All right, so we're on to budget. Frank, and you brought some copies for what we've already looked at by email ahead of time. I asked him to bring paper copies.
Mhm.
And David, I know you've had a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
Kim is leaving us at the moment. Congratulations to Jack, her son, who's joining the National Honor Society. That's where she's leaving.
That's good.
Yes, that's where I'm going.
Aha, Jack, I just called you.
So I apologize for leaving.
Good job, Brattleboro Public Schools.
Yes.
Very good. Academy School graduate.
Yes.
Kimberly, if I can give you the
Yes.
finance committee report. That
Perfect.
was last, what was that, a couple weeks ago, maybe?
Okay. Perfect.
Okay, so,
You have paper to pass out to us?
yes. So for budget, maybe just so you have a paper copy, but it's also on the website if you want to take the budget planning timeline, and I'm assuming unless I hear otherwise, we'll stay with the schedule that we talked about on October 4 at the supervisory union meeting. And this is the budget planning schedule for fiscal year 19. So didn't really intend to discuss that unless folks want to revisit the dates. And then David, did you send your questions to everybody?
No.
Okay, I did make copies,
I
so
didn't know if I should, so
that will help facilitate our discussion. So there's a single sheet, David's questions about the financial report that while we were up in Montpelier on September 20th with the State Board of Ed, I don't know if you actually reviewed it, Jill, in the meeting, or just acknowledged, okay, that it was available. So here comes the email copy of the fiscal year June 2017 preliminary year-end report. So I can give you a quick highlight of that and then take a few minutes to address. David had some questions that are on that single sheet of paper. Does that sound good? Okay. So just briefly reviewing the fiscal year-end results. It is preliminary. We have an audit ongoing right now. We expect that to be wrapped up certainly by the end of the month of November. The auditors are doing 7 audits concurrently, of course, so if it was just Brattleboro Town, I'm sure they would be done by now, but they are working on all 7 of our audits. So maybe the most important document in a financial statement is the balance sheet. So if you look at your table of contents, you see page 13. Let's go to page 13, the general fund balance sheet. That's where most of our money flows through. And we do have more copies. Did everybody have a copy? Did you say you didn't?
I can look at it around. I printed what came in the email. They only went to 12.
Okay. So this is the same email. I just printed the email before I came.
Yeah, was it 2 sections?
Nope.
Maybe your computer didn't like the whole document.
Your computer might
Anyway, I can, this is the part.
truncated it, yeah. So page 13 is the balance sheet. It's a 2-pager. Assets, 2.5 million, you see on page 13, and then lists of liabilities, many of which are student activities that the principals manage. So the most significant liabilities are on page 13, and that's accrued wages. But as I say, the most important number is, well, where did we begin? That's on page 14, beginning fund balance, 907,000. See that? Favorable, 907,000. We talked about this at our budget development review, so that was June 2016. And then we added 189,000 to that as a result of this fiscal year. So I'll give you the highlights of that. So 907 plus the 189 is $1,096,000. You know, and that's within the context of our, what was a $15 million budget. Now we're at $14 million. Spoon?
Where did most of the savings come from?
Yes, so let's review that. And while we're on this, keep in mind that fiscal year 18, remember we budgeted $130,000 loss, or essentially a reduction of fund balance. That was a planned deficit to reduce fund balance, which also reduced taxes. So where are the variances to the plan? The plan was a balanced budget. And let's go to revenues, which is on page 1, right after the table of contents. Revenues, the plan was $15,987,000. You see that? We received $16,134,000. So in revenues, we received $147,000 more than we planned. So that's the bulk of the surplus. And much of that is grants. 83,000, and this was one of David's questions, what's the energy grant? That was the Wyndham Wood Heat support for primarily the Academy boiler project, but then also the Estiville boiler. So you remember we had that unexpected replacement. And some of the costs were, or most of the costs were actually in the prior year, but this is the way the grant cash flow came through. So that essentially, will be part of our discussion when we look at the capital plan. The other significant revenue surplus was in the Medicaid. You see, we budgeted 103,000 and we received 175. So additional $72,000. Much of that was associated with a new employee, Tabby Favreau, who is doing just a terrific job in the position of maximizing our Medicaid reimbursement through, it's a very kind of onerous process. She came from a doctor office background and had a lot more insight than a typical candidate might have in terms of, how to work through a billing system to maximize the reimbursement to the district. And it also has to do with, we have more kids, and this line of revenue is dependent on the number of kids that are receiving Medicaid or Medicare services, Medicaid services, and therefore we get a proportion of that reimbursed. So that was an additional, in that particular line, 30,000 and 72,000. So you put those together, and that explains the vast majority of our favorable revenue sources. So then when we look at, well, how did we get to 189? 147 was revenue. And to get to 189, it means we ran a surplus for the balance in expenditures, which is what you see on the end of the expenditure document on page 12. We ran about a $42,000 surplus against our plan. So when you look at page 12, all you're doing is looking at the totals of 15,987 budget, and we spent 15,945, $42,000 less. And you see that variance on the $15 million budget. 10% is 159,000. 42,000 is substantially below that. It's a relatively small variance. So there's a quick overview, and then I know we've got a few other things to do, so let me just zip through David's questions, and I think that might also help you understand a little bit more about the fiscal year, and then we can address any other questions that you might have. So I'm just looking at this single sheet here, and I will share my insight, and then I'll ask the principals to jump in at any point, because generally the principals initiate most of the transactions and obviously manage the schools. So in many instances, they're probably better able to answer the questions than I am, but I will give you my explanation. So I wouldn't apply that to the revenue section, because I deal with the revenues a lot more than principals. So revenues, earnings on investments, why are we favorable? That's attributed to tax anticipation note that you had approved. You may remember that. We hadn't budgeted for a tax anticipation note, but John O'Connor, you may recall, called me up. I had shared that with you, and he indicated the town wouldn't have the cash flow to advance this money, so we borrowed money, and that increased our interest income because we did a line of credit, which means we borrowed the maximum amount we would need in any one day. We borrowed that for the year and earned a higher interest rate than what it cost us. So the net effect of that, if you also looked at the expenditures, you would see that we had a, where's our number? I gotta have another document here. I made it disappear. Where's the big document? I think the revenue budget was, what does it say on there, 5,000?
3,000 was what we had in the budget.
Yeah, so we budgeted 3,000 and we received 28,000. So we had a favorable 25,000. If you had also looked at the expenditure budget, you would have seen that we budgeted a similar $3,000 or $5,000 for just bank expense, but we actually spent 21,000. So the net variance there was we made out 9,000. We made money on that deal, which is the nature of municipal interest rates. We can borrow money lower than we can invest it. And of course, I am investing it in completely secure money market funds. So that's that. We already talked about the energy grant, and so let me, and Medicaid, but I'll also mention Title I and Title IIA was favorable against the plan. Let's see, Title IIA was no budget, received 14,000, and that has to do with just revisiting poverty. We put budgets together, as you know. For this budget was December of 2015, for the period that ends June of 2017. The Agency of Ed actually makes the allocation, and they make that 6 to 7 months after we have to go to print at the town report. So inevitably there are adjustments that occur.
And that happens in Title I as well?
It does, yes. Why a surplus in intensive services? And okay, let's look at that. Oh, okay. Actually, you're reversing that, David. It's we're actually intensive service revenue. You're still in the revenue section on your question. So if you look at your page 1 there in revenues, intensive services, we budgeted $1,373,000. See that?
What page is that?
Page 1 on the revenues?
Revenue page.
Yep. We budgeted $1,373,000, we received $1,307,000. So we received less, so you might say a deficit, but it's less than planned. And the answer for that is that we spent a lot less in special education. So intensive reimbursement is what the state calls this form of revenue. It's essentially state aid to help fund special education services. And it's a proportion of how much you spend. So you'll see when we go through the rest of the budget that we spend $125,000 less than the budget in special education. And if you take about 52% of that, you're going to get a variance of about $65,000, and that's the way the funding works. What else do we have? Yeah, same thing. You have a question on why an expense in care custody. It really wouldn't be a good way to state the question, in that you're looking at revenue, and we had no plan to receive revenue, but we received $37,000 in revenue. So the question might be, why do we have a $37,000 surplus? And the answer is, care and custody is related to when the state places a student in one of our schools, and if that student is on an individual ed plan and requires services, the state pays for that. So we didn't know about this child when we set this budget. We provided the services, the state reimbursed us for that, so that was an unanticipated revenue. Of course, there were costs that were in the budget as well that paid for. Next group, $120,000, or oh no, I see that's an account number, subs. Why so low? So I think now David is looking at page 2 of the financial statement, and he's saying what's going on with the sub budget. And if we look at that, $120,000 was the plan, spent $102,000. I don't know if you see that on page 2. Why did we run a surplus of $17,000, I guess is the question, right? And the answer is we had at least 2, maybe more long-term subs, and this is where principals could fill in the blanks if you needed to. But if a teacher is out, like on a maternity leave, and they're out for more than 30 days, then we have to hire somebody in the teaching position. We don't charge them to the sub count. The subs are for the 1, 2, 3, 4 day assignments, short term. So you will see, and you had a question about why is Green Street's salary over budget, and that's part of it. Yeah, that's part of the answer. Here we go. You want me to quicken up the pace here?
No, I think
We're going to be all right? Okay.
No, we're not scheduled to go to the Act 46 part till 6:30.
Okay. I didn't know if you had other things on your agenda. Early incentive.
Hello to all of you that get to continue hearing if you were here for 6 o'clock to 6:30.
Early incentive. So I guess we're on page 2 of the financial statement, and David is asking about why is there.
Yeah, I thought that was early retirement incentive, and I know we stopped doing that a couple of years ago, so I was surprised to see a number there.
Okay, so the budget was $34,000, and we didn't charge anything there. The answer for that is, what that is also intended to cover is there is a provision for if folks elect to retire, they don't necessarily tell us in December, but the negotiated agreement has a provision for a severance payment. It's about $8,000. And they have the option of electing that as a non-taxable benefit, which would go to that account, or if they elect to take it as a taxable wage, then we have to put it in salaries. So that again would account for the Green Street variance. We had 2 teachers that took the separation benefit, and again, they were actually both in Green Street, and they elected to have that as a taxable income. So that is why you'll see when we get to that question, Green Street is salary in instruction is over budget. It's because we're under budget here. Let's see, pre-K, why are we over in pre-K, or let's have a look at that. So count number 330, preschool, we budgeted 365, we spent 421 over about 25,000. And I don't know if anybody wants to answer that other than more kids signed up. And we budgeted for it, and there were a lot more kids than had ever signed up. So,
That's not just in the Oak Grove.
That's not the Oak
This
Grove
is
at all.
the
This is
Even
all
Oak
of
Grove.
them, yeah,
This isn't us,
all the
right?
support, all our partners and everything.
Yeah, because this is,
private.
this is last year budget, so that
Right,
you'll have a,
yeah.
And so that
Right.
brings me to a question too, for the pre-K stuff, we don't have any control over who all signs up.
No,
no.
So our budget is truly just based on historical perspective and a guess, an
in
educated
the
guess.
state's
but-
announcement of the $3,100 voucher
Mhm.
that
Times whatever amount of kids we
Mhm.
historically think, that's how we come up with that number.
That's right.
So that
And
can
that's the
always be
revenue
off.
that pays this.
There's no revenue associated with that.
With the state's 3,100.
No, the 3,100 is expense. That's how you get to 400 and,
Oh, I see.
it's that 3,100 times the number of kids equals 421,000, and there is no revenue. That's all.
But they do count in our equalized student.
They do count their equalized student, and that's how we set our tax rates. Yeah.
So there's a revenue in the equalized
In
student.
that sense, yeah.
Yeah,
The
the
money
pre-
that comes from the state
Right.
for the whole
It's
school
good to not
district.
associate revenue with pre-K. There is no revenue that's associated, but it is a misperception that people refer to, because there used to be, years ago, there used to be a grant, but there is no revenue associated with pre-K programming.
They just enter in our
It's just
equalized
like
number.
the electricity bill and the teacher salary and the benefits, it all adds up to 15 million. You divide that by the number of kids, and there's your cost per student, that sets your tax rate. There is no revenue associated with pre-K.
So like the way they present it for parents is you'll get $3,100 towards your 10 hours a week or whatever.
Yeah, the parent,
But that's not how it's
the provider gets that money from the district. The district cuts a check to the provider, and then the provider works with the parent to negotiate the tuition. Next question, 561, tuition, why is it over? So in this segment of the budget, so we are still in general instruction of the budget. And the tuition budget here is 25,000, and we spent 78,000. This is for those students that are not special ed, but we were not able to find a solution, a good program for those students. And these are tuition expenses associated with outside placement for regular ed
And is
kids.
that, again, something we don't know at the beginning of the year what's gonna happen, we just pay for it when it happens?
Right, yeah. And I
And
don't
so
know.
how does that enter into the special education monies that go to?
There's no relationship to special ed with this kind of,
So this is out of district placement?
that has nothing to do with special ed.
Could someone explain what kind of situation would that be? If someone didn't have special ed needs, but there was, what would the other thing be that would cause us to say, this kid's needs will be better served outside the district?
Like a stay at the retreat,
Oh, okay,
like it's
Mental.
child suffering with like mental health
Okay.
issues that
I
just
see.
we can't provide in a public school setting.
Okay, so it's a more of like
Therapy.
behavioral things, that's not
Yes.
educational
Therapeutic,
disability.
medical, behavioral,
Okay,
cognition.
Could it also be a child that was involved in a physical accident and has to be tutored at home because can't make it to school or something like that?
If that were to happen, that
A
would come
long
from that
time.
as well.
That would go into this category too,
Yeah.
something like that.
The next line, software, Dave's asking, why is it under budget? It's, we spent less than plan. I have an answer, but if the principals have any other answer, I'll defer. I was thinking is, knowing that we had a substantial additional grant that Lyle had initiated, the school improvement grant. My understanding is that covered some expenses associated with programming, and there's a similar connection when we look at the math. You had a question about textbooks. And I think we purchased some things through the grant that we didn't use the local funds. But I don't know, did you have anything to supplement that answer with?
No, I mean, sometimes, you budget in November, December, and when it comes time to purchase, sometimes you over budget, sometimes you under budget, and things happen. You think a program costs a certain amount and ends up being a lot more when you go to purchase in July for the next school year.
In this case, it was less.
Or less,
we didn't
right.
We didn't fully utilize it. Okay, the next group is a look on page 3, questions around the itinerant salary. Itinerant salary refers to generally phys ed, music, and art services. And you may recall we had a discussion about this as we were developing the fiscal year 18 budget, which is a preference that we've discussed and agreed on, that where we have the ability to have accountability at the school site, we make that happen. So the budget was originally developed as this, what we call district-wide. All of these costs that we've been talking about are what's called district-wide costs. They're not associated with an individual school, because you can kind of hear the nature of these costs that we're talking about. Where does the preschool $400,000 bill reside in any one of our schools? Well, none of them, because it's a check that goes to a private provider. So that's a district-wide cost. That tuition expense that we talked about is similar. But we said, well, when you have a phys ed teacher that works at Green Street, why don't we assign that cost to Green Street? So that's what we've done. The budget, and we've kind of streamlined this in fiscal year 18, so we won't be looking at this. One area has a surplus and the other area has a deficit. But it speaks to trying to have more accountability at the site level. So that explains the favorable variance on page 3, 106,000. And it also explains the unfavorable variance in the Green Street line.
Do you think we ever might get to not calling anybody intern?
It's fine with me. I guess that itinerant has been
Itinerant,
there for a very long
I
time.
don't ever like that. I just
Yeah.
feel like an odd way. It's like the foreign aliens.
The next group of questions here relates to, still on page 3, professional development and the 1%. This is another area that I've worked with the principals and Lyle on aligning things better between when we plan in December versus when we implement, 6 months to a year and a half later. The practice was to assign a budget resource, a plan, to a contracted service account number. That's what you see here with the variances. If you're looking at those numbers, 2212 means professional development, and then the 320 means contracted service. The problem is that more often than not, when we pay for professional services, we are paying staff to instruct a class, to conduct training, to provide the service. And when we compensate a teacher leader or a staff member, we have to pay according to the IRS rules against a salary account. But that's not where the budget is. So, of course, the actual has to reflect what happened, the budget is what we anticipate to happen. So this is an area where we've done a lot of work in fiscal year 18 again, to say, well, what do we think we're gonna, for 1%, how much are we gonna pay the staff versus how much are we gonna pay a contracted service? And when we look at the total of those sort of expenditures, let's see if I've got some notes on that. I think I do. Somewhere in here. We're, this also is connected to course reimbursement. So course reimbursement is a negotiated provision in our collective bargaining agreements. Kind of comes back to the question Robin was raising around, what's available to help staff, get degrees. And there's a significant benefit for the teacher, for both, master's level coursework. And when we put those two categories together, 1% money and the course reimbursement, David, the surplus you saw in 1% is largely consumed in the course reimbursement budget, meaning when you put it all together, it kind of washes itself out. And but we're looking forward to having a better match this time of year with.
So you're saying that the 1%, the money where the 1% is funded from is also the course reimbursement?
It's
And
related
so it
to
was
that.
lower, spent on 1% and more on course reimbursement
That's what
this time
happened in
around?
17, that's exactly.
And typically, when we approve the 1% funds, in the fall and the spring, we try and make sure how it's spent. So to see $27,000 was kind of surprising.
Yeah, and
But it
again.
was all spent.
Yeah, what you would need to also take into consideration is how much is in the teacher salary line where they were paid
Right.
for 1% work.
Right.
And that's what we've broken out in fiscal year 18. And-
So David's real question is, was it all spent, really?
Yeah,
because that's.
And the answer to that is yes.
To a
Yeah.
lay person, it looks like it wasn't.
Exactly.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, operations, now we're on the page 4 of the financial statement, operations maintenance. David's noted that in some of our building maintenance accounts, we have some favorable variances, primarily in fuel oil. And you may recall this conversation as well, where there was a suggestion that maybe we could really cut back on our fuel oil budget, knowing that there was some declining prices, and of course we should try to align with the market. I also wanted to point out, though, that if we look at all of our building maintenance, here's the comparisons. We budgeted in fiscal year 17, $819,000. So this is all 3 buildings plus Estyville, Canal Street, and Powers House, all the properties. So this is all the maintenance, all the fuel oil, all the repairs. This is the custodial services. This is snow plowing, everything. We budgeted $819,000. We spent $872,000. So even though it looks like we're favorable in snow plowing, or not snow plowing, but in fuel oil, we're unfavorable in other areas that actually, exceeded our budget plan. Now, we said the whole thing came out within $40,000 of the whole thing, and it was favorable. So obviously, some things offset others. And as Mark said, we just don't have a crystal ball, so can't predict necessarily the price of oil or how much snow is going to fly. So going on to the next page here, nutrition, food service. Question is, why didn't we fully utilize the subsidy? And page 5, let me see what that looks like.
$55,000, year to date is $30,000, $25,000 that we didn't use.
Yep, so that is related, as you know, to the CEP, Universal Meals Program. And when we developed the budget, you may recall Andy and principals, was very much Andy spearheading a food quality review. He was very disappointed with the level of trans fats and sugars and a whole variety. Where's Andy? He's speaking to this. A variety of what he thought were not good, not good nutrition for kids in a learning environment. So we met with the vendor. We put a number in the budget, as you see, 55,000, expecting two things. One, it's a new program, so we don't know exactly how it's going to go. We don't know the level of participation. And we asked the vendor to bring in a much higher quality food source. The results were that the food service program didn't cost us as much as we had expected. And the program is intended to be basically a break even. So what we do is that we look at the fiscal year end and we determine how much does the local school district need to contribute in order to balance the revenues to the expenses. And the number was, as you see, the amount that we recorded, the 30,000 instead of the 50,000.
So even with the much, you feel that indeed we received and we feed a much higher quality of food.
Mm-hmm.
And even with that, it was almost half of what you thought it would be.
Well, you're only looking at the school's contribution.
So do you happen to have any idea at all what the actual costs of food were?
Yeah, so, one of the acts, I think it was Act 152 and then Act 156, just like special ed, required food service to be accounted for at the central office. So Brattleboro Town, I could look up the exact numbers, but in general, Brattleboro Town's food budget is around $430,000. And the federal subsidies are substantial, but we expected Brattleboro Town to have to contribute 55,000 of that 400 and something thousand when we developed the plan. And that's dependent on a few things. One is cost of food, and another is how many kids are going to eat breakfast and lunch. So those are not necessarily easy to predict, especially when you're changing the menu. So based on based on the actual experience, there is this variance. So really, the variance is on $400,000 plan. $25,000 variances again.
Actually, my question was whether you happen to have noticed what the actual figure was for cost of food.
Cost of food is part of a bid process, and it's based on cost per meal. The real variable is how many meals are served, and that was actually a little less than we expected. We thought participation would be higher than it turned out to be.
I'm unclear on how this all works out with the funding. Does it end up impacting the bottom line negatively or positively when fewer kids are eating meals and under the universal meals?
It depends on, for Brattleboro Town, yeah, it's a good question, but when you run a food service, there's a lot of variables for 800 kids every day, breakfast and lunch. So to answer your question, fewer meals served is going to be generally lower cost, but it's also going to be lower federal reimbursements.
Right, so that's why I wasn't sure if that was negatively impacting it or if it was
in this case, you see it was financially favorable. And it's because We thought the vendor was gonna charge more for the higher quality food than they did. And that was outside of the base bid of the food service contract, which the board approves every year.
So this difference isn't really about the number of kids eating, it's more about how much did the provider charge per
It's
meal?
actually both. It's actually
Oh,
both.
okay.
Yeah.
So what do you think for next year, Frank? Can we look at the lower number for the budget? Or-
Yeah, I've got to look into it. I don't have that forecast yet. Okay, so moving right along, Green Street. Oh yeah, so Green Street, we talked about the salary changes associated with phys ed going in, retirement incentives going in, wasn't in that budget, so we've answered that. Page 6, we also have answered the course reimbursement question, and then I think we've also addressed the books and the equipment question that you have here, David. This is where when I looked at a little bit more at the details of this, I could see something like Eureka. Was that math or reading? Math, yeah. Was purchased. That was a single item of $17,000. I don't think that was a line item in our original budget, and to some extent it was supported through the school improvement grant, right?
Mhm.
So there was a shift in those line items, but they ultimately were funded. You had a question on snow plowing. Snow plowing is a contract. The contract is fixed for snow plowing, but it's not fixed for snow removal and or the salting and sanding. So that's a variable that comes and goes. Then we have page 11, after-school programs. Yeah, so after-school programs in total were actually utilized the funds and then some. You were looking at a subset of after-school programs. And you had page 11, right?
Mhm. Yeah, the salary and the regular instruction after school program.
Yeah, so maybe one of our principals will help me with this, but what it appears to me is, so you were just looking at the academy after-school program on page 11, toward the bottom, $42,000 budget, $18,000 spent, so that's $17,000 favorable. But if you looked at the Green Street after-school program, you would see just the opposite. So when you add Oak Grove, Green Street, and Academy, and you look at all after-school programs, we were pretty close to budget, a little over. And it appears to me, even though I don't know, that it looks like the program had been planned at Academy, but actually got run in part at Green Street.
Maybe a little bit. I think our program just really developed over the last year. So as we plan our budget for this year's budget for next year, we'll have that historical data to make the adjustments on 3 schools.
Yeah. So overall, there was no leftover money in after-school programs.
Thank you.
Very good. Yeah.
If we can go back just a little bit, just my own information to try and understand. One is, you made a statement that the money that we can invest is invested in, I don't know how you put it, but absolutely secure, of which there is no such thing. You have invested it in the most secure place you know.
That's right. It's no different than our daily cash flow.
Yeah.
It's a bank product through People's United Bank. It's a line of credit that is refunded every day between our operating account and the line of credit that on the investment side of the line, I think it pays.
Let me understand, is there actual investments in something?
It's the banking industry's use of the Federal Reserve funds that, you know, we make sure that the funds are collateralized, and it's no different than our daily checking account cash flow. It's the
Yeah.
same level of security.
Okay, and how much is in that on an average daily basis?
Well, a $14 million budget, it could be, you know, it'll average. Our funding comes in, as I recall, Brattleboro Town collects quarterly, is that right? Do you pay
Yeah.
quarterly? So our cash flow spikes up 20 days after you folks pay your taxes to town office. And our consumption rate is pretty regular. Yeah.
So it hits about, it hit about 4 million at tax time and then slowly go back
That's right.
down to
Yeah.
very little and then go back up
Yeah, we
again.
spend a little over $1 million a month,
Yeah.
and, you know, and,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I have one more thing. I would like to make a motion that we change the word itinerant to circulating staff.
Is that possible? Go ahead,
Sure,
sir.
yeah, we
Who do we
Yeah.
have to ask, God?
Well, I'm
We make
asking
the
Frank.
rules, Jill, we can call it whatever we want.
Well, I'm asking Frank, can you change things in your program? then?
It's fine with me. I would share with you that the state is implementing a statewide chart of accounts, and we're gonna see quite a few account title changes and code changes. We've done a good job aligning our codes with the state codes, but this interest in you know, data and analysis and accountability, transparency, the state has said time to rewrite the Vermont State Public School Chart of Accounts. So you're going to see a lot of account changes. We can make this one, but it will probably be pretty temporary. But I'm glad to do it.
So let's, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I like that, spoon. I thought that word was strange.
So what are we calling it?
Itinerant is now circulating staff.
Circulating or
We
traveling?
also have universal meals in a couple minutes to do.
Yep, we have 4 minutes before the next meeting's supposed to start, and Dave was wondering if we could talk a little bit about, I think we want to finish this one first, then we'll give you a break. Talk a little bit about universal meals, which actually Alice is just walking in from Putney, and I know this is an issue near and dear to Putney as well. So, Dave, you want to ask your question
Yeah,
specifically?
the statement was made that if we merge, all of the students in the district would be eligible for universal free meals. And I didn't think that was right based on how I understood that, so I wrote to the Director of Child Nutrition Programs at the Vermont Agency of Education, and she wrote back, complete with a chart with all the data from 2016. And based on data reported for the period April 1, 2017, the supervisory union as a whole is not eligible. Further down, she says, I don't believe that the numbers could be sufficiently increased to get to 40% for the next school year. It's 40% of food stamp, of SNAP benefits, not free and reduced lunch. So my question is it accurate that if we merge, everybody will get universal meals, or is it, based on what she says, it sounds like if we merge, everyone will lose universal meals? So that's my question.
So as far as I know, the study committee didn't take a position on or address anything about universal meals in the Articles of Agreement. Is that?
It's in there, it's in the articles, it's one of the things that could happen. But it
Oh, it
said,
could
at town
happen,
meeting,
yeah.
it said that it would be. It
Yeah.
would be there.
No, I think it could happen. Unfortunately, the way the trends are going in our area, we're seeing a growing rate of poverty. So I think that's a fair statement. But as far as I know, there was no provision or assurance for universal meals being implemented as a result of the merger. It's simply one possibility, is the way I recall, but I'm looking for a document, I don't know if it doesn't look like I have it with me, that identifies the eligibility for each community. Do you have that?
I do.
Yeah, so if you just list that, you know, the numbers, oh, actually, is this here? Maybe this is it. That will illustrate.
ISP, the number?
Yeah, that'll illustrate how close or how far apart some of our communities are.
Yeah, Academy is 45.69, again, this is April 2016.
So as David's mentioning these numbers, just keep in mind, 40, if you hit 40, you are eligible for community eligibility program, which is this free meal and free breakfast and lunch.
For all students,
For all students, yeah.
So 45.69 for Academy, UHS 28.24, Dummerston 18.67, Green Street 52, Guilford Central 29.29, Oak Grove 35.94, Putney Central 23.6, Vernon, we don't count, St. Michael's we can, 16 point, well, Vernon 27.27, and St. Michael's 16.79, and the average is 32.5%. And if we calculate the numbers without St. Michael's, it goes to 36.2%, but still not 40, and she doesn't believe the numbers would sufficiently increase to get to 40% for the next school year.
But the schools can still apply for this not as part of the district, isn't that right?
Well, if we merge, we still could pursue universal meals for all schools, all, you know, in this case, it would not be districts, it would be one district. Keep in mind when you heard those numbers, so Vernon has dropped out, so that they were below 40, but they're no longer relevant to this discussion around a merger. And then you mentioned St. Mike's, they have been separated. That was substantially lower than the rest of us. So the rest of the numbers that you heard weren't terribly far away except for Dummerston from the eligibility numbers. So whether, you know, things continue the way they are going and we have increased poverty and we do trigger that, I don't know. I wouldn't predict that. But the answer is yes, Robin. There's a something called Provision 2, where any of us can access universal meals. You could do it now. You can do it a lot better under a merger because you do have the benefit of the average, where it is an average. So for those communities that are well above the average, that helps bring up the ones that are below the average.
Well, right now, like we have Oak Grove Academy and Green Street receiving this, even though on their own, Oak Grove would not qualify, but the average of the three schools is high enough
That's right.
that they can be part of the thing. And I think in that
Because we're a
message from Lori, though, that if you try, even if you group like those three schools plus Guilford, then nobody would get it, right?
Right now, that's the case. But you wouldn't get what's called community eligibility provision, which is a higher level of reimbursement. You can still do it. You can still get universal meals for all kids in all schools if we were a merged system. But we talked about the local district subsidy. That would have to go up
Okay.
because the reimbursement from the USDA is not as great under this provision 2.
So they would
You have to
be
pay the
receiving money
difference.
from the federal government, but at a much lower rate per student.
Yeah, and we'd have to pay the difference.
So I think it's somewhat unknown as to what it's going to look like in 3 years, but unfortunately, we're moving a lot closer to that 40% as a region, you know, of people, you know, kids that are qualified under that criteria in poverty.
So I guess that's kind of a good segue to put our Brattleboro Town School Board meeting, which, hello to all of you that have walked in the middle of it. This is a bit of finances stuff, so it wasn't perhaps maybe the most exciting discussions for you to all walk in on. And then we can jump into the study committee presentation. I'm not clear whether our meeting stops and it becomes a study committee meeting. Last night in Dummerston, it was a Dummerston meeting. So, Lyle, what am I supposed to adjourn us, or it just continues as a Brattleboro?
Yeah, and then you'll
Okay.
adjourn.
So we'll take a short break to be able to have the film.
So I'm going to start us off
before passing it to Jill, I'm Alice. I'm the chair of the committee, Alice Laughlin. And we forgot to bring, for the first time ever, we forgot to bring our name tags. So we're just going to go around the table and the room and introduce ourselves, and then Jill is going to take it away with Ricky's assistance. Okay, so
Ian Torrey, Brattleboro representative, and I have a brief communication after we're done introducing ourselves.
okay.
Amy Wall, Dummerston.
Ricky Davidson, Brattleboro BUHS Board.
And Jill Stahl, Tyler Barbaro, Town School Board.
Spoon Agave, Brattleboro Town Schools.
Christina Naylor, Dummerston Town School Board.
And then you guys.
Maya Holiday, Superintendent of Schools. I also have a brief announcement. The newspaper said that there will be an informational meeting in Guilford on November 5th. That is actually November 6th. So you can go to Guilford School, but we won't be there talking about Act 46, November 5th. November 6th is the correct day.
And Ricky. I mean, Ian. Or Frank.
Yes, I'm Frank Rucker, the Wyndham Southeast Supervisor and Business Manager.
Is that?
Yeah.
I'd like to object in the strongest terms to the tone and nature of these public sessions. The presentation is not simply informative, as it should be, but advocacy for a yes vote. This is inappropriate. However, this pales in comparison to the recent mailing that was sent out. The mailing, also clearly advocacy, was printed and mailed using public funds. Use of taxpayer money in this manner is completely unacceptable. I will not participate in the shameless propaganda of these presentations. Furthermore, I cannot be party to the willful and blatant misuse of public funds evidence to that mailing. Therefore, effective immediately, I hereby resign my position on this study committee.
Thank you again.
Have a nice night.
Me too. Was Ian not at the meeting where we went over all that? I thought Ian
He was
I don't-
there, I thought.
but, so, was he there?
I don't remember.
We'd have to look in the minutes to see if Ian was there. I'm pretty sure Ian was there at the meeting when we reviewed all of this. We had no objections that time. Yeah. Okay, so I suggest we just go ahead. The meeting is put that in about to minutes. present information on what we've done as a study committee and where we're at. And so, Lyle? Look at it. Walk you through real quickly, and I'm gonna go quite quickly on this because I think everybody in the room has been here for previous forums, so I don't think you need a lot of the history. So the whole thing is the law designed to address increasing cost and widespread inequity throughout the state. Has five goals. Can you see? You can all see, right? Okay. 5 goals: provide equity, achievement, operational efficiencies through increased flexibilities, promote transparency and accountability, and delivered at a cost that the taxpayers value. Who are we in the WSESU? I think most of us know this answer. So the study committee was a 2-year process. We had someone from each of our schools, or school districts, which is Brattleboro, Putney, Dummerston, Guilford, and Vernon when we started. Vernon, as we all know, has now, as of this spring, the ability to leave, and they have voted that they do wish to leave should a merger happen. We've alternated our meeting locations, we've had regular meetings, we've had informational meetings, small group subcommittees, Secretary of Ed, and questions with the Agency of Education. We've had our meetings televised, we've had agendas, minutes, all of that's posted. We've looked at a lot of stuff, so very quickly, stuff that you've seen already probably, but again, this is our high school. This is 1,418 back in 2002. We're down to 1,104. Same general trend. Blue is Dummerston, yellow is Guilford, orange is Putney, and Vernon is the grayish color. And here's just Brattleboro alone. It's the aggregate of the 3 schools from 792 down to 707. This is our enrollment when you put it all together, the percent change every year. This is our enrollment as of right now, September 2017. Brattleboro Town Elementary Schools is 725, BAMS 293, BUHS 776, etc., down to our total of 2,224. This is our enrollment. This is a little small perhaps, but maybe I'll go up here. It's pretty interesting. This is something that you might not have seen because we just looked at this as of this year. So it looks at our class sizes, how many kids we have. In Academy we have 3 classes of 51, 54, etc. Oak Grove has 2. This is the pre-K, and then there's 2 classes all the way, Oak Grove is 1. Green Street is 2. Dummerston is a variety, yes. Not always 1, sometimes 2, depending. And Guilford is 1. Putney is 1 always, all the way across. And Vernon is also a mix as you go across. So you can see some varying numbers as you go look at that. This is the makeup of Brattleboro Union High School, where people come from. Obviously, Brattleboro's the majority. Also, we're pulling in, obviously, Dummerston, Guilford, and Putney and Vernon. But then there's also Halifax, Dover, Jacksonville, Marlborough, Roxborough, Westminster, foreign exchange students, school choice if people come here, or tuition students, or tuitioning from out of state, state placed residing in district and state placed not in district. So a total of 1,069. So if you look at that and summarizing, again, really quickly here, you have our decreasing enrollment, but increasing education spending. Fiscal year 2005, we were at almost 11,000. The state average was almost 9. By 10 years later, in 2015, we were at 15. The state average was 14. So the increase is 45% or 56% for the state. So declining student enrollment, increasing cost, healthcare costs are up, and student needs are up with increasing cost. So our challenges, not too tricky to figure out. We have increasing costs relative to state spending threshold. The state says this is the amount that you pay if you pay a penalty if you go above that amount. The high school is above it, Dummerston is above it, and Putney's above it. One of our challenges in our region is rising poverty. This is not a surprise to anybody. We've talked about this a lot in Brattleboro. Again, if you look at some of the lines, which is kind of complicated, but here we go. So green is Oak Grove School, and Academy is this lighter blue. Guilford is the darker blue. Brattleboro Middle School, and BUHS over 6 is this orange. The darker is Vernon, Green Street School, and who's left? Putney here, and Dummerston down here. So in general, there's different levels of poverty. Dummerston down here used to be below 20%. They're now at about 43. But we're all kind of going up. Pretty much going up. I don't think there's any argument. So since August 2015, the study committee members have worked collaboratively. We've studied the data from all of our districts. We've learned a heck of a lot about each other's schools and communities, and we've listened to the public input. We solicited feedback from the local school boards. We've also talked to people at forums. With all of this, we came up with our report. The report went up, and it's been unanimously approved by the study committee and by the Vermont Board of Education with commendations for our work, especially regarding the school leadership councils. And now you all get to decide on Tuesday next week. This is just a small list of all the stuff we studied. And we can find it. I remember at town meeting last year I showed you a stack of all the stuff that we've been looking at for 2.5 years. Test results, staffing, per student cost, who has a forest, who has an endowment, how we do things. One of the most valuable things that every one of the study committee members will agree with is that talking together was really a good experience in figuring out what we've been doing. So then what did we learn? Through this, we found differences in equity, differences in the quality and the variety of the educational opportunities that we offer across all of our schools. We looked at educational outcomes. This is the SBAC, which used to be the kneecap. Now it's the SBAC results, which is a different test, but the same general idea that is taken by a lot of different states. This is the English language arts first column, the second is math, and then the poverty level. So 67% of the kids at Academy School were proficient or proficient with distinction. 56% in math, and our poverty level is 74%. You can do those comparisons all the way across. When you get down, you compare where are we at in comparison, 42% in Vernon with poverty level, 48% on the English, and 52% in the math. This is one part that we looked at. It's one test. It's not the end-all be-all of everything.
Jill, can I ask a quick question about the number up there?
Yeah.
What causes the poverty to go mathematically below all of the other numbers when we hit students at BAMS in the high school? How do you explain that number?
So it's obviously nonsensical. What we found is that students do not return their free and reduced lunch forms when they get to 7th and 8th grade, and even fewer in the high school. Generally, the state takes that into consideration. That's not just here, it's throughout the state. We get fewer people sending their forms back when we get to
I would recommend in the future putting NA there because it just looks ridiculous.
Could I ask a question to Jill?
Do you want to go back?
Just in terms of, was that an average, because they take the CBEC is done grade 3, grade 4, it's done throughout the first 6 grades and then in the high school.
of the school.
So it's an average of the school for the past 2 years on the CBEC?
This is just the 2016.
2016.
So the first year the SBAC was 2015, right? Yeah. And the first year they said when we got done with it, and we told you about that I think at our town meeting, that it's the first year, it's suddenly a computerized test. It was so new that they said kind of don't look at that very hard. So this is the second year. So we found differences in cost and in spending. We discussed alternative options for merging, a lot. We found none of them to result in the outcome with greater benefits in our current proposal. We looked at the reds, the side-by-sides, the layered, the modified union, the school choice, retaining the same structure. There's variances of opinion, perhaps by some folks on the study committee, that there's still perhaps other options maybe to be considered. Christina and I had a nice long conversation today to try to wrap our heads around that. Those are things that we definitely looked at. We had 2 subcommittees that broke apart, and David Scholes was on that at that time too, and analyzed every single option that was laid out. And at all times we looked at it thinking what else is out there and what else could be looked at. At this point, we say that the merger that's here is the best option for our kids. It allows the small schools to stay open, improves educational opportunities, and addresses many concerns in our communities. And that also addresses, therefore, the main goals that are listed in the law. We think it offers more value and builds on our own school cultures, and addresses our weakness, builds on our strengths, and it offers an increased opportunity for community involvement through the leadership councils, particularly. The leadership councils, Ricky's done the math. Right now the school boards are?
Right now, the school boards are about 28 people if you exclude Vernon. If you add, and with leadership councils, with a basic leadership council of 5 and the 10 entities that would have one, there would be 50 people involved in educational decisions for the schools. So it comes close to doubling the number of people that are engaged.
And it requires teachers, staff involvement.
Staff, teachers, parents, in some cases, when it's appropriate, students and community members.
Parents.
Yeah.
So we feel that it achieves educational equity, sustainability, efficiency, collaboration, and educational opportunity. Local leadership, that it supports students and families, and that it is a merger created by community members. So what does it offer? It's one board looking at everything from pre-K all the way through to graduation from high school, and looking at all the programming and the opportunities in that. It bases student outcomes on one continuous plan. It's one hiring structure for all employees, which allows you to retain higher quality staff and advertise for one full-time position instead of different part-time positions in different places. It removes obstacles from regulatory agencies like the IRS that make sure you don't give benefits to someone who doesn't have a minimum level of work hours, and labor standards boards regarding shared employment. It's a cohesive leadership team creating capacity for meeting all the challenges in all the schools, where you can utilize job coaching or math coaching in one school only needs to have a couple hours, and you can use that person in several different schools. And it reviews all the policies and the strategies through a cohesive lens, as we do all end up in one high school anyway. The staff will be shared as agreed upon for behavior programs, new curriculums, best practices, teacher leaders. Program expansion opportunities will increase with the ability to share staff and could include such things that we have in Brattleboro, such as technology integrationist, school-based social worker, foreign language teacher, pre-K programs in more schools, after school and summer school programming. How's the structure of the governance different? Right now, those are all separate boards. We become one, and with 9 leadership councils individually. So as Ricky was pointing out, for Brattleboro specifically, we had 1 school board, and then we go to, for the elementary schools, so we would go to 1 for Academy, 1 for Oak Grove, 1 for Green Street, and 1 for EES, and then we still have BUHS, and we have the Wyndham Regional Career Center, and also BAMS. All of those schools will have their own leadership councils. How do we break down the new unified board? 4 representatives come from Brattleboro. We are the largest population. By law, we become the largest population on the board. However, Brattleboro representation to the board, which was Ricky, Kim Price, Ian, myself, and then David was on for a little bit and couldn't continue with the meeting schedule, so Mark stepped in, and Mark has now moved on, and then Spoon stepped in for the last few meetings. All of us on that Brattleboro representation to the study committee were very clear that this is an issue that really worries the outlying towns and how Brattleboro could be in control of everything, and we worked hard as a study committee to try to balance that. So 4 representatives from Brattleboro, 1 in Dummerston, 1 in Guilford, 1 in Putney, 2 at-large, and the at-large can come from any of the 4 towns. So it is completely possible that you would have 3 from Dummerston or 3 from Guilford, wherever, Putney, or you could have 6 from Brattleboro, or you could have some variety. It's not necessarily always skewed to the largest population.
And if I can just jump in too, when we looked at that, we were initially given one set of directions as to the way you had to do it, and that felt really uncomfortable to a lot of us. And so they said, well, here's option B, and we didn't necessarily like that very much either. So we came up with, we said, what about a hybrid version? And that's essentially what we've created. Part of it is statute required based on population, but there was some flexibility to create a hybrid there, and that's what we came up with for a governance structure.
There were several times throughout this process that our legal counsel was probably not pleased with us, because we didn't always listen to what they gave us as instructions. We fought back, and several of the things did end up finally being encompassed. One of those besides the board structure was the leadership council, Legal counsel had recommended that this be put in kind of a suggestion, and we advocated and insisted that it be put in as part of the Articles of Agreement, which would mean that it would have to be put in place. So they would be established in each school, as we talked about, provide local input on school-specific programs and activities. They have a chair, vice chair, clerk, and committee membership. The district board, by our Articles of Agreement, someone would have to actually come from the district board, the unified board, to those leadership councils. So there would definitely be input coming in directly. And the unified board would also move to those various schools as their meetings locations.
Jill has a question.
Maybe it's gonna be covered, but they only have an advisory capacity.
So yeah, that's gonna be covered right here.
Okay.
I think it's put in here. So who's on it is the school principal, staff member nominated by their peers, appointed by the board chair, 3 community members, and 1 student representative if that's appropriate. What's the next slide, Lyle? So what will be different, and the leadership council question that you have comes right in through here, is the leadership council does not have board authority as a school board does now. However, right now, when you make a budget, the teachers would have to talk to the principal. There's no sitting around a table where you would have to have a staff member present to make a budget. The expectations of what we put into the Articles of Agreement, I don't know what page it is, someone can probably say, list out a bunch of the things that we expect that leadership councils would do. One of those things is looking at the budget and helping create that, giving input. Also looking at school policies, some of the stuff that we do on school board now, and again giving input back up to the unified board.
They'd be on the hiring committee.
They would be on hiring committees for school staff, which is one of the things school boards do now.
Leadership councils, if you have this document that's up front here, starts on page 9 and goes into page 10. So it spells out a lot of stuff that's here, but
one of the biggest questions that's come up throughout the entire discussion is what will be different, and town meeting keeps coming up as a long-honored, or time-honored, long-standing tradition in Vermont. And the concern that folks say is, so we're taking away town meeting and we no longer would look at our budget. So the informational session that goes on right now for us in the end of March, that Wednesday before our town meeting, would still occur. That would still occur, although a little bit earlier, probably for the rest of the folks in their individual towns. If you have been at those meetings, which looking around the room I think all of you have, invariably someone raises their hand and says, and what about this over at BAMS, or what about this over at the high school? And we always have to respond, this is only a meeting on the town elementary schools. That meeting would change so that it would actually be a report on all of our schools. So you would get to hear about BAMS and BUHS and Green Street and Oak Grove and EES and Academy and Dummerston and Putney and Guilford, if you wish. Yep.
Could you clarify, back a slide or two, it said that the community members on the leadership council would be appointed. How would they be chosen? I mean, would they be elected, or what does that
So
mean?
they're nominated at town meeting and appointed by the district board to serve for 1-year terms. We fought with legal counsel on that. We wanted them to actually be elected, but if you elect them, then they become, you can't do it by law.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah. So at that town meeting, informational night, you can ask all those questions, you can see it. One of the other positive things that doesn't happen right now is right now you look only at the town elementary school's budget in Brattleboro. The BUHS budget, BAMS and WRCC, those budgets you have to go out to a separate meeting, which is attended, Ricky, by?
about 2 to 3% of the voting population of all 5 current towns, and that's the one that's held in February around Valentine's Day-ish, usually, in the high school gym.
Folks don't make it a Valentine's Day date to go out.
They don't usually, no.
So that changes, and people will actually hear whatever they want and look at that budget. And so you're increasing scrutiny of our budgets by changing that. Also, right now, who votes on the town elementary budget is only the representatives to the town of Brattleboro. This will change to an Australian ballot, so everybody has the opportunity to express their opinion on the budget. We all have our opportunity right now to go to the BUHS meeting, but it's a separate night, separate meeting, etc. Some other comments folks have said from other towns too is that town meeting format doesn't always allow you to express some of the concerns that you have, and a private vote would allow you to have that. So, can you back, Lyle? I didn't know if there was something I missed on that. No. Well, it's voted on town meeting day is what it says here. So for us, for town meeting, I forget what we decided on that. What happens with us because we're later?
It would still happen during town meeting day on the actual election day itself. So for Brattleboro residents, on town meeting day, when you go to cast your ballot for select board members or whatever else that you're voting for on that day, you would also vote on the budget for the whole school district.
So our school information night would be moved forward. It wouldn't be before the Brattleboro representative town
The
meeting.
meeting would be before the actual election.
Exactly,
Yeah.
but it would still be held. What else is going to be different if we do a merged district? So some of the things that we thought were more opportunities and positive for the kids. Right now, if a kid is at Academy School and the family decides to move to Guilford, the kid has to leave Academy School and go to Guilford. Nothing against Sean from Guilford. Guilford's a lovely school. But we have actual data that we've looked at that says, surprisingly, as long as you can keep the kid in one school, they do better. And it's less disruption. That can happen when we are all in one group. The family would just say, okay, we want to continue at Academy School, and we'll get the kid back over. There is busing right now that goes between all the schools, and the central office feels that can continue. So what else might happen be that maybe you feel your child would really do great in another setting. Perhaps instead of BAMS, and a larger middle school, perhaps you feel that your child would do better if he attended Dummerston or Putney. That's an opportunity here, or vice versa. Somebody in Dummerston or Putney might be able to say, hey, I'd rather send my kid to BAMS. It's not on here, but another thing that comes up that occurs to me as a mom, as a lacrosse parent, if we're all together, the kids up in Dummerston and in Putney can come down and play in the BAMS sports. Let me tell you, as a lacrosse parent, that would be a good thing. We could use more kids at the high school level, and you need to start them young. Not probably the main reason to vote for something, but an interesting idea nonetheless. Teachers and school staff can have their children attend where they work. Right now, if you're a Dummerston parent and you work in Academy, your kid's still going to go to Dummerston, but maybe you would rather have your child with you and have that flexibility for the end of the day and the beginning of the day. Unifying provides an opportunity for students to be in a school that best suits their needs. Now, all of this stuff, of course, we can't suddenly have every child going to one school because then we'd have some imbalances. So there are some things written in there to balance that and make sure. But there's numerous educational benefits for individual children, their classroom communities, when children are allowed to remain in the same school during all of their elementary years. One of the biggest things that people have said is, this is all about closing schools and small schools. And nobody's here from Guilford tonight. Guilford is the one, or Sean, do you want to speak, or both of you? Do you want to say anything about that and where Guilford has felt on how that affects you? And Guilford, everyone points to as the smallest school, but I will point out that they're not that much smaller than all Oak Grove, Putney, and Dummerston. We're all very similar.
I think it was a consensus by the school board. I didn't go to too many of the meetings, but they did express it at the Act 46 Study Committee meetings, that Guilford actually would benefit and be able to sustain itself longer under a unified system. So I think generally the Guilford School Board is in favor of unification for that reason.
So, because in a merged system, the smaller schools have more, not less, safeguards to keep them in their communities. First of all, no school under the proposed agreement can be closed within the first 5 years. And then effectively, it's 1 year more before anything could be closed, because you'd have to have a year-long, very specific process that we've laid out in the Articles of Agreement. That includes a lengthy process of town input, considerations of how the town would be affected, and it's specifically asking for the input from that town. And further, if a school is ever closed, the local community can buy that school back for $1. So this is an interesting idea because the word equity is battered around a whole lot, and what does that actually mean? And in this case, looking at it, equity for them meant that 1 step stool, 2 or 3 in order to get to that same level of equity. And that's the idea in this. What did you say, Alice, about shoes?
Oh, what was the quote?
What was the quote?
Equal is everybody gets a pair of shoes. Equity, everybody gets a pair of shoes that fits.
And that's the goal with what we're trying to do here. So what happens if the merger vote is successful on Tuesday, next week? The $150,000 state transition grant kicks in to help move to a unified system. I think some folks from Dummerston have been very specific that you have to also detract out or subtract out whatever we've spent up to now. So it's like $130,000 if you want to be very specific on the money. We decide how we want to unify rather than being told by the state. Schools receiving small school grants can continue to receive those grants. Greater chance of keeping our schools open and viable, and the tax breaks come to us if we go through. So I want to come back to that just for a second. The tax breaks are 8 cents, 6 cents, 4 cents, and 2 cents. Those kick in. Those are part of the law. If we take the merger now, those come to us. If we say no, those go away for sure. There's no chance for that going back. That's in the law. The small school grants we don't receive in Brattleboro. So why do we put this on here? Well, one, it's the presentation for everybody. But why is it important to Brattleboro? Because as a unified system, that money comes to all of us. The fact that Dummerston is getting 60,000? 30,000 and 35.
Guilford is 60.
Sorry, Guilford's is 65. That money comes to all of us, so that does directly affect how much money is coming in. And we decide how we want to unify. So if we look at the next slide, I think, Lyle, what happens if it's voted down? This is our only opportunity as townspeople to vote. This is the only thing allowed for in the law for an actual vote. That's why we say this is why we all get to decide. If it doesn't go through, what happens? So we specifically asked Donna Russo-Savage, Principal Assistant to the Secretary of School Governance. What did you call her, David? The Chief Explainer of Act 46 or something? Is that your term? Somebody had a term for her. That she was part of writing the law, and she's been the one that's been our main person for giving explanations. So we went to her and we said, so you tell us what happens if it doesn't go through. So we have it very clear, and then we put it in here exactly what she said, so you all have it. Not to be too boring, I'm going to read it out loud. If the voters do not approve a unified school district, then when the state board creates the final mandatory statewide plan, it will consider everything that it has before it at that time. If the board of one or more of the districts submits a Section 9 proposal that proposes a merger or that proposes something other than a merger, then the state board will consider that information. If a citizens group submits a proposal, then it will consider that submission. And it will consider the study committee's original merger proposal and any other additional information as well. The Secretary of Education prepares a proposed statewide plan, but the legislature authorized and required the state board to make the final decision. So note, we lose the financial supports offered, the tax decreases, and the grants we already talked about. And the timeline, we vote November 7th. by December 26th, the school board of each district that won't be a part of the newly unified governance structure by July 1st, 2019, must perform these 3 tasks listed in response to the first question. In essence, must look at how, meet with other people around the region, and look at how we can do what the study committee's been looking at for 2.5 years, and come up with a proposal that addresses those concerns and send it to the state. And that has to be done by December 26th, which is about 7 weeks after the vote. It can be sent up earlier, and she notes in another spot that I guess we didn't copy into here, that it's also possible for a school board to look at the study committee's proposal and say, this is what we want, and just send that up to the state. So the high school board has no influence, I guess, on that at that point. It's going to come back to the Brattleboro Town Board, and it'll come back to Putney, to Dummerston, and to Guilford. I don't know what happens to Vernon. I guess Vernon does their own thing, I guess. That's kind of what they've decided they want to do anyway. So at that point, we have another meeting scheduled for November 15th. So we would, if the merger fails, we would be looking at it on November 15th, what we want to do, and decide where we want to go. There is an alternative governance committee meeting. They're formed of Dummerston folks and Brattleboro Town School Board about, what, Robin, 2 months ago? We appointed David, who was already attending unofficially, but we appointed David officially and Kim, who's been a part of the study committee, to actually start meeting with the folks in Dummerston in an official capacity to hear what's going on, as we thought it prudent to be prepared. We're the largest block of kids. So what are we going to do? At this point, Guilford and Putney are not sending anyone officially to those meetings. And at this point to date, David's been reporting back, or Kim, about what the meetings have done, and they've been looking at very similar things as to what we looked at in the study committee. They've been collecting ideas from around the state, but there's no official plan on paper, although Christine is working.
Well, without knowing who's on board, it's hard
Right.
to make a plan.
Hard to make a plan without knowing who may want to be a part of that if this does not go through. The Brattleboro School Board, when deciding to participate, was careful to note that that does not mean a vote of no confidence in the merger or a vote of confidence in the merger, really. Either way, it was strictly seen as a prudent move, since we have the largest population, to be a part of the conversations and see what else other people might want to do. In the end, the way the Brattleboro Town School Board sees this is it is the law. I don't think there's any disagreement from any of us on that. This is a law, and we're going through May 31st. They'll review the proposals, and we can supplement and amend, but by July 1st, 2019, there's merged districts. Is there another slide on that? No. Here we go. By June, they issue the proposed statewide plan. Through November, would take testimony, and we can supplement and amend any Section 9 proposals, which would be a whole new proposal. By November 30th, that's the end. They're going to issue the statewide plan that may or may not incorporate anything that was sent in as a Section 9 alternative proposal. So, I tried to go very fast because I felt like what this really is about, it's not as fast as I wished, I'm sorry. More for your questions. What else would you like to know? And what are the lingering doubts that are out there? And we did make a notation yesterday, and I didn't say it at the beginning, like you guys did in Dummerston. You could debate the law during this time if you wish, but we can't change the law. So really the questions that we're hoping that you might want to ask would be more directly to what happens, how does this look, or if there's anything that we can answer from the study committee perspective. Spoon.
If it's voted down, can one possibility be simply a revision of our draft agreement?
Yes. The proposed study committee agreements, yes.
Yeah.
And Guilford indicated again last night, and Dummerston at this meeting, that that would be their probable route. That they're very happy with the proposed agreement and that they feel that is in their best interest for the town, and so they would probably just send that forward. Putney has indicated at other times that that's a very likely option for them as well. I wouldn't dare to speak for us, Spoon. I don't know what we would say. Andy?
I'm Andy Davis. Couple of just sort of informational questions. The leadership councils, are they in existence in any school district that you know of? When you propose them, is it a functioning method of governance in another part of the state of Vermont, in another state?
Yes, although not exactly as you're asking. They came from, they were expanded upon from a private school that Kim Price actually happened to work with in the state of Connecticut. And they are somewhat, the formation and the membership of the council is largely borrowed from what's required by federal law for the Early Head Start and Head Start governance committees. Policy council,
The
they're called.
biggest skepticism I hear is that because they're, according to the merger articles, they're advisory. And the question is, will they attract people who come to meetings for strictly an advisory role? So I'm glad to know.
So I'd like to respond to that, though, too.
Okay.
We gave them as much teeth as we possibly could. And if you want to go back and look, really, truly, if you have nothing better to do in life, and I really hope you do, but there's lots of comments and lots of thoughts during those times in those study committee meetings about leadership councils. The pushback that we got was, if you make them de facto school boards and you give them a lot of power, then you've defeated the whole idea of the merger. So we have gone against legal counsel. We've pushed up as hard as we can and crossed them and made them take back. And anyway, we fought to give them a lot of power. The other thing that I've questioned people is exactly what is it that they think their school board does that they feel they're losing that they won't have as a leadership council. I don't know if you have an answer to that. And then I also wonder too, when we worry about that, right now in all of our individual towns, we've had times where there's not a full school board because there haven't been people go out. And right now for the unified board, there's no one running from Brattleboro or a couple other towns, aren't there?
Yeah, there's only, I'm running.
Spoon's running as a write-in, but you didn't get your name on the ballot.
No, it wasn't very well announced.
And I'm also running as a write-in because
As a write-in,
Yep.
and Sean is actually on the ballot,
Yeah, for the two-year at-large.
at large.
And I did have a question about that. If the unification is voted down, I presume that those people that were voted will not be.
No, there's no board to
Yeah,
join.
No board,
Right.
yeah.
And the other question is, we'll get back to you, Andy, sorry. The other question on the other side of that is what happens if we pass a merger and we didn't have someone, then that would be appointed. We checked that out, right? It's
Yes.
appointed by the school boards in existence now.
It would go through the same process. People that were interested would write letters to the current sitting board, and then we'd go through the same process of interviewing the people interested, and then the board would make that decision.
So coming back to you, Andy.
Oh, I was also wondering, there's talk about how alternatives were looked at. And, when I read the presentation here about what will happen if the merger is defeated, it seems to me, I know that there's not much time between now and December 26th. There was an attempt to start this process back in March, but it didn't pass at town meeting because people believed that they'd already been looked at, the alternatives. That was the argument from the school board against the town meeting initiating that alternatives process back in March. There does seem to be that alternative governance will be looked at until November of 2018, which is more than a year from now. And that the question is making the application and getting your foot in the door sufficient. Some people are saying, oh, you'd have to have this completely spelled out legal document by December 26th, which seems like a way of promoting the merger, like the alternatives are impossible because we only have 6 weeks till now. But another interpretation is that if this merger fails and is voted down, then there is time. And the state could still do something, but that's not an argument for not believing in pursuing a merger.
So do you want to
Okay.
go back?
But my question is, that was my editorial comment. My question is, how can I go back and look at the deliberations the study committee did on those 4 or 5 alternative structures? Where are the minutes, the time period that shows up in the videos? Because I think that's really important to go back and look at that process.
2 or 3 answers for you.
Yeah.
But first, for your editorial comment, my editorial comment back is the same thing. This is what she said, and that's why I don't want it to be an editorial comment on my part. This is what she said specifically. So, and Lyle has, the 3 points when she refers to I think it's the next one, must perform the 3 tasks listed in response to the first question. We can give you that. Put it up on, I don't know, we can put this up on the website and you guys can all go look at it. And what are the 3 questions? But it's the same charge as what is in there for the first study.
So the door's open.
So that, to me, to answer what you're saying is, whether it seems like it has to be a full-fledged plan or not, I think every person has to read what Donna wrote and come to their own conclusions of what that means. As far as watching and seeing what we've done, personally, and I think these guys would probably say the same, I think they should speak for themselves. Christina would have a different opinion and should speak up if she wishes. I feel like every single conversation that we had looked, at least for me mentally, was not ever looking just at we are going to do a specific type of proposal and a specific type of merger. I never went into this with that idea. So every single question comes out of it. Now there are 2 meetings, entire meetings basically, where we talk about alternatives and look at those prescribed alternatives, the reds and all of that. What is being bantered about now isn't one of those particular specific prescribed forms. But for me, every single step of this was what is possible. I never had a specific, this is exactly how it works. But if you want to look
point out, I don't think the alternative committee is bantering. I think we're working really hard to try and meet the goals and keep our current structure.
Banted about, like there's an idea out there that's out, but it's not actually written.
But Andy, if you go back in the agendas, it was the first year, probably the first 7 to 9 months when it hung
Yeah, I was
down.
gonna say there's probably like winter of 15 into 16, there was multiple meetings where it's
I
in the
know
minutes.
one was here.
Yeah.
And there's, if you go on, I'm sure you've been on the WSESU website with the Act 46 page, if you click on the one that says Act 46 options, we said we have 2 committees, that link is the result of one of those committees.
And there were changes to the law since that time as well. So.
Yes, there were, but
Okay.
those don't change those.
Those don't change those particular options. Sean?
Yeah, prior to town meeting, Beth Bristol did a wonderful PowerPoint, and she went through very specifically the path and why some things didn't work and some things would work. And I don't know if that PowerPoint is available.
I think it's on the WSESU website, so you look for a Guilford presentation, it looks from the Guilford side, but exactly why Guilford came to this conclusion too. It was a charge from the Guilford folks at town meeting to make sure that that was actually looked at, and she came back and presented that.
And she did the PowerPoint at our town meeting, so you could watch that BCTV show and see that whole PowerPoint. It was pretty definitive.
Judy?
I have a question about how many questions are going to be allowed per person, because I have one question and then I have a comment. So I have to choose.
I am trying to be as flexible as possible, and it's only 7:30, nobody's screaming yet, so you're good.
Okay, so the first is a real question, and this is about, there's a table in the financials that is the estimated FY school tax.
Is this in the Articles of Agreement?
In the articles, sure, on one of those pages. So it is the one that shows how we're all going to have a level tax rate based on an FY budget, unified budget. So in that particular budget, subtracted from it is $500,000 in PICA savings. And you've subtracted that from the actual operating expenses. So I'm wondering, since the PICA savings are supposed to be staff cuts, that's what that was all about, are those staff positions, that $500,000, that have already been cut from that proposed unified budget, are those already staff that have been cut or have retired in the past 2 years?
So let's don't go further. So
Okay.
answer that question. So, you want me to try and see if I'm bad on the answer? Frank's always ready to help.
He's back up.
So, the PICA study is one format. It's, and, you know, that when we're referencing, it's not saying we're taking exactly what they said and applied it. I actually had this question thrown as part of the debate, which is another thing that people can go see if they wish, that David and I talked about that on Friday last week, right, David? And that's on BCTV, and I think that's on the website now as well. If not, YouTube has all of them, and BCTV's website has all of this stuff too. So the cost savings have been conservatively estimated between 1% and 5%. So in the figures that we put into this, it's 1%. And that's based on the assumption, based on the actual experience of consolidation for the special education monies that went to the supervisory union level instead of at each district's level. It's based on what we saw for that, and we said, well, then we can expect some similar savings as we merge and come together for all of that. So attrition right now runs at about 5% annually. And, oh, I don't have my notes, 720 employees? Something like that? 720 employees for our supervisory union as a whole. So when you look at this, you say, okay, someone's leaving. What makes sense here? Is there a couple people leaving? Is there a way? And you can look, it's the assumption that you can look from a higher view and you have more options to see how things can work together more cohesively. Now, the next part of that people will say is, oh, then you're going to cut, you know, you're cutting my kids and all of a sudden you're going to bus my kids 5 hours a day and they're not. So, remember the slide where we looked at how many kids were in each class? In Brattleboro this year, if you look strictly on numbers and you say we should have a class size which is ideally studied to be 17 to 18 kids or whatever, then we should be cutting a classroom in 3rd grade and in 6th grade right now this year. We should have done that in Brattleboro. Without any unification, we're already unified with 3 schools. But we didn't do that. And so the question is, how are we going to do that on a unified level? And it won't be done overnight. It's not going to be done in an immediate fashion that next year we're immediately firing one 4th grade teacher and making everybody come together. But it would be done with planning and with the ability to see from the overall view.
I guess my concern is, particularly in Brattleboro, what I know about the PICAS report is the PICAS report believes that 1 teacher for 17 students, and that's kind of what we have in Brattleboro overall, should handle all the emotional and behavioral problems of the kids in her classroom. This is a national study, the PICAS report. And according to that report, we should be letting go or allowing to go through attrition, paras. And in the town of Brattleboro, what I'm concerned about is we know, given our poverty level, that we need paraprofessionals in the classroom, and that the teachers, a single teacher cannot possibly handle the variety of emotional and learning disabilities in the classroom. So what I'm concerned about is when you start with a sum of money that you supposedly need to meet, and basically Act 46 was sold as a way of cost. I mean, it was for equity and for all those other things, but from the legislature's point of view, it was to lower property taxes because they were hearing from voters. So I'm really concerned about Brattleboro schools and the needs that we have, and having this be a goal with a national philosophy of cutting paras and cutting staff, even if you're going to try and do it through
So a couple
attrition.
of comments on the PICA study. I'm not sure that anyone would say that it's a goal at all. That's a number that, what's the total budget if we put it all together?
Yeah, 57 million or so.
So 1% is how we've just come to that. So it's not that we suddenly said 500,000, we're going to come hell or high water, we're getting to 500,000. That's not a goal, and no one has been looking at it that way. Also, I'm not sure that the PICA study was a national study. It was a Vermont study, which actually Frank and I got to have input on. It was a scary day.
But they were comparing like
They were-
special education.
The fellow who put it
identification
together is from
nationally.
Wisconsin, he's done it in
Yeah.
Wyoming, and yes, so he has national perspective.
Exactly.
But it was a Vermont study, and it was kind of a scary day for Frank and I up there, in that they were asking for input. I think they had one in the north, one in the south, and I'm not still sure how I got to go up to that, but they asked for input. And one of the first things that was said from the people in the room was, wait a minute, paras? And they also had a number in there of like 500 kids per nurse or something?
Yeah.
And everybody in the room said, you've got to be kidding. There is no way that would function in here. And so they did adjust from what they had seen in other regions of the nation for a specific Vermont recommendation based on many levels of research, and the guy's a professor and all of that. But definitely we fought back as a group, saying there's some unique situations, and I say it was a scary day because I believe it was there that I heard that 1 in 5 or 4, I think it's 5, I hope it's 5 at least, children in Springfield Hospital was born addicted to opiates. It just stuff I didn't want to know about, honestly. But it was,
So I'm glad to know that that's not a definite figure, but on the other hand, since I believe in budgets, I was a little bothered that if that was an anticipated savings, it got subtracted from the overall operating expenses as if it was going to be a set in stone budget savings. So that,
well, I think the mandate in putting together the proposal is to show what your anticipated savings are.
even though you're not setting that as a real goal, because you know that that would be disastrous
It's
here in Brattleboro.
anticipated. That was the assignment, so that was what was done.
Okay. So the other thing I have is about, again, the financial figures from the study committee's report. And as most of us know, as we've read in the newspapers from Rebecca Holcomb, we cannot expect that these tax incentives are really going to be translated into tax savings. Because she has said publicly for the past 2 years, or since 2016, that the cost of the merger are going to be enough so the town should not expect to see substantial savings. So even though that's been stated formally by the Secretary of Education, the other thing that's happening is we know that the statewide property tax is going up by 8 cents this year. And it seems like one of the crazy parts of Act 46 is that we're being promised an 8 cents tax incentive, while at the same time we're being told that we can expect our state school property tax to go up by 8 cents. And it's this craziness of this act, because some of that money is going to pay for other towns that have merged. So,
So wait, before you go further,
right?
Frank, what was the number that you told me that is the anticipated amount that's going, or Christina, you had that number earlier today, that's going to be spent?
1% of the ed fund is going to pay for merger incentives.
So that's the only number. But, so let me
But
also,
I have a few more.
I know, so that's why I want to respond where you're going. It's all right. I mean, I think what she's asking is questions everybody's interested in, so. You can agree or disagree with what I'm going to say, as is always true, but I just want to lay that out very clearly. The way I look at tax incentives is this. If I know that I have to buy this can of soup, and this can of soup costs $1, and you tell me you'll give me a coupon for 10 cents off, it's gonna cost me 90 cents. If tomorrow this can of soup costs me $1.50 and you give me 10 cents off, it's gonna cost me $1.40. I've saved money. I have to buy that soup. I've saved money. That's the way I look at the tax incentives. You can semantically talk about whether that's the tax incentive or not. The other point of it, are taxes gonna go up? Yeah, I think they probably will. I mean, that's the way life works, right? We have fought in Brattleboro. David can sit here and tell you because he's been on here for more years than I have. How many years we've fought, David, to keep taxes down and to not raise them. And how have we done that? David, how many years ago did you and I go to that Vermont School Board Association meeting and came home and said it's unsustainable? We looked at 9, right when I was first starting, we came home, we're like, this is impossible, this is unsustainable in Vermont. And we've been, since then, both, and then everybody else who's come on, looking at this saying, how do we cut, how do we cut, how do we cut? But yet, how do we meet the programs, and how do we do what's necessary for these kids? I mean, last year you all approved here in Brattleboro a social worker. And I congratulate the town of Brattleboro for the compassion and the way that people are able to look and say, this is what we need here.
Why would we want to give that up?
And why would we want to give that up? Exactly. So then in comes different versions of how you get to that.
Exactly. And I have a question.
No, I'm not done, sorry.
Okay.
The bottom line to this is cost. I think Frank will probably say I say it too simplistically, so if I do, Frank, tell me wrong. How do we get to what, you remember the guy that came to the microphone a couple years ago and he said, I want somebody to tell me, what does it cost? What is my tax rate? Do you guys all remember that? He was going on and on, what is my tax rate? And I thought, yeah, that's a dang good question, what is my tax rate? Because that's not how taxes work, we all understand that now. The tax, we all pass our budgets, we send them up to the state, and then they come back down to us with a tax rate. And how do we get money back? We get money back, and remember, we don't pay our amount that we actually have in our children right here. None of us do down here, and basically nobody does around the state. So how do we get that money back? We get it back on cost per student. So if we add programming into this budget, and we increase the total budget, but we add in kids, we're at a lower cost per student. It took me forever to get this. Ask Frank how many times he's said this to me in about 100 different ways. That's the whole bottom line here. When you merge together, your cost per student comes back. So are our taxes going to go up with this merger? Less than if they don't have a merger. Because our cost per student goes down because the student number goes up.
Okay, I just want to finish my piece, and then I would say that since Brattleboro's taxes are all, right now, the lowest of any of the other school districts in our WSESU, there's no question that Brattleboro's taxes will go up.
That's arguable too, and Frank can walk you through it.
But let me do this in terms of, one of the things you were talking about the can of soup, and what I'd like to say about that is that because of income sensitivity, each Brattleboro household is not going to get the same amount of 8 cents, 6 cents, 4 cents, 3 cents, and then 2 cents at the last. And in fact, in Brattleboro, only a family making $140,000 and therefore above income sensitivity will actually get the full tax, 8 cents, 6 cents. A family that's making, and they'll get like $240 on a $300,000 house. The median household income in Brattleboro is $48,600 according to the state tax department that I called yesterday. And their incentive is going to be less than $95 a year because they've already had their property tax reduced. But those property taxpayers in Brattleboro who in fact need it the most are going to get the least back in terms of tax incentives. So the $900,000 that we're being told in that table is going to be what Brattleboro is going to get, is going to be significantly less than that. And particularly for the people who are in that $50,000 range, they're going to be very disappointed when they don't see that as a rebate. So what I'm actually concerned about also is that in this budget there is no list of accurate expenses for us to vote on. And as taxpayers, usually you have a budget and you know what you're voting on. In this particular scenario, we are told, yes, we're going to get this incentive, but we have no sense of what the costs are going to be. No, the study committee did not go to law firms, which to me would be a really logical explanation. Other towns have had legal costs. Why not find out what is it actually going to cost to
For
combine?
the transition to individual to one merged.
To one merged district, because Secretary Holcomb says that's going to be a major expense, and we know that lawyers need to make money, and that will be a significant
I think
expense.
central office does have some estimates of that.
But
Do you wanna respond to that?
I wish that that had been included in a budget, because that would make sense to actually be able to vote on that and for voters to see what they're voting for.
But you're not voting on the budget anyway in this proposal.
No, we're not, but it would be, we're voting to change a whole system of governance that will definitely affect our taxes. So it would be nice to know what are those contributing factors.
Let Frank answer that
Well,
question.
I'd like to finish, because there are other things in this that are also true.
Well, I just think it's good to add that, you asked that question,
But
so let's have Frank.
I don't want to get distracted. We'll go down to Frank. I'm sure
All right, so write it down,
he's-
Frank.
he's a
since you're
numbers
here.
guy. So the other thing that will happen in terms of a merger will be all these expanded opportunities. And there is a page, not in the financial sector, but in the other piece that says what are the different educational opportunities that will have to be expanded to the other towns. All of these programs are ones that Brattleboro taxpayers have paid for already. Partly, I believe, because we have a representative town meeting whose people are self-selected, and therefore they really are very supportive of the school as well as of their towns. So I think one reason that Brattleboro has the number of programs we have is because our taxpayers have paid attention to the needs of our children in our school. But one of the things that's listed, the reason I'm challenged by these figures is there's a list of different programs and estimates of costs which seem very much underestimated, but one that really stuck out as like, how could this be a valid figure is the one for the Guilford preschool, which was listed as a Head Start program for $5,000. And the fact is that Guilford, God bless them, voted last year at town meeting to have a full day pre-K that's going to cost close to $160,000. Now this would be an accurate figure that could be placed in the budget or in some kind of notes in the financials for some indication for people to know how these expanded programs are going to be effective. And I understand that Dummerston is considering a full day preschool too. Those are all great things, but that would then be part of a unified budget and should be things that people know about before they vote on something that is more of a smokes and mirrors kind of a promise of money without knowing what the expenses are going to be. So that's my say, and Frank, I'd like to hear what you say about that piece.
Okay, sure. So the transition issues, keep in mind the central office currently operates all of the budget functions, all of the personnel functions, all of the administrative functions for the 7 entities. So we are very aware what the transition costs are. We understand what the state is saying where they want to see a merged system. So there's going to be very little need for a legal counsel because, again, we're all public schools. We become a single district public school. So instead of 7 public schools, we are simply 1 public school, 1 employer. So transition costs might have to do with some data management to help convert 7 separate databases into 1 single database. And that is why it's a cash grant, $150,000 cash grant. And I have not heard of I think we've got 129 towns that have voted to become 32 districts. And I have not heard in those transitions of those that have gone before us that they've exceeded the $150,000 grant. I do not expect we would either. So transition costs, I see us breaking even, and in fact the state says that you don't have to account for how you allocated this cost of transition. It in fact can subsidize other parts of the operation. So your second question, what was the question?
Well, the question was about all the expenses, and where legal expenses will come in is you have to transfer the properties from the 7 different schools have to be transferred. So there will be legal fees just involved in transferring those kinds of properties.
I don't see that. There's a single statement in the statute that indicates how that transfer will occur. there's really no room for, negotiations on that. It's a very simple statute that basically says once the entity is formed, the assets will transfer. Some of the towns have anticipated this and are considering whether or not core, or I should say non-core property assets should remain in the system, like Putney, and they're taking measures to address that. But that is, again, I have not heard that being particularly onerous across the state, and this is now, will have the benefit of 129 districts having done this before us. So this will not be a mystery to us. As it relates to the estimate of a future budget, we did consider that. We said, what would be better? Should we take what we know today, which is these current budgets? We've got them on the website. Study committee has them in the report, the articles. I'm sure you see them there. The question was, what would be better? Taking what we know today in terms of the state funding formula, enrollment, and staffing, and say, what would our district look like if this had have occurred with the conditions we understand and have published? And we did that analysis of you, as you have referred to it. No question about it, the Act 46 says their language is tax decrease, and it is applied in the increments that Jill has shared with you. So we could have said, well, all right, instead of taking what we know today and applying this law to it to define the opportunity, the financial impact, we could have said, let's try, this is fiscal year 2020, let's try to anticipate what the state yield would be, let's try to anticipate what enrollment would be, let's try to anticipate the changes in demographic that affect equalized students. We could say, let's try to hypothesize about a variety of things. Our conclusion was, by the time we get done defining our variables, you're probably not going to have a lot of time left actually focusing on what the state has said you must focus on, which is educational quality, closing the gap, and then all of the benefits that are associated with a single employer. And that's the issue.
The expanded programs were clearly a list, with estimates and figures, and the preschool, in Guilford was one thing, and that could have been updated very easily. It wasn't like figuring 2020.
Yeah.
So I think it's frustrating for voters to take a look at something that's pretty vague and be asked to vote on that with the expectation that it's not going to cost very much, when the Secretary of Education says, don't expect to see these as tax savings.
Absolutely, it's not intended to be cost savings. We're not supposed to be making our decision on money. We're supposed to be making it on, do we reduce the gap between the lower socioeconomic learners and the rest of our kids? Are we able to address the separate interests that Guilford Grand List sort of dictates to that board from Dummerston, from Brattleboro, and from Putney? And then the question is, given what Jill presented in the PowerPoint, how does it benefit our students when we have these obstacles to sharing staff and resources when they all end up at the same place at the high school? We are a community that is together in terms of students. When you get back to the core of the funding formula, I think Jill said it very well, it does come back to not how much you spend, and that's what you're raising an issue around. It's not how much you spend, it's how much you spend per student. It is truly as simple as, if you spend $15,000 a student, you're going to have a $1.50 tax rate because everything is divided by a $10,000 denominator. If you have a $1.70 tax rate, $17,000 spending per student, you're going to pay $1.70. It will be adjusted by your CLA. So the point is that when Guilford considers a preschool, well, they have enough room before they hit the penalty threshold to make that investment. But as soon as that one investment triggers that penalty threshold for them, they're not going to be able to deal with the language issues, the after-school programs, the other interventions that we know, and as you referred to in the PICUS report, we know really affect learning. And the reason is because they're going to divide the next investment of $20,000 over 100 kids instead of 2,300 kids.
And I'm just concerned about our schools in Brattleboro as well as Guilford. But I worry more about ours because we have a higher level of poverty, and we need all the programs that we have. And so that's what I'm really concerned about.
And we've been worried about that too, throughout the whole thing, and making sure not to. So, lots of questions. Hopefully Judy had a lot of questions the rest of you had. I'm gonna move over here. Hopefully we addressed all of them, Judy.
Hi.
Can you say your name?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, my name is Bethany Ranquist, and I guess I'll just start and say that I'm the mom to Caroline and Elias, and my, I don't really have a question, actually, more a plea for going forward with this. I really wanted to come tonight, and I have a 10 and a 7-year-old who really didn't want to come tonight. They can think of 100 different things that they probably would want to do. Actually, I bribed them with a lot of Halloween candy to be sitting quietly here, and I think overall they've done okay. They might have bumped some seats and stuff, but and you know, my legs are now tattooed with washable marker, and there's a mess over here on the floor, and they're tired. This is my plea, actually. I'm not just rambling. You know, I'm the mom of school-aged kids. And so for me, I actually find it so frustrating that the majority of meetings like this, or select board meetings, or any of these meetings that happen that really have so many of us that are stakeholders and that have our feet in the game, like, there's not childcare available for this meeting. And I don't know why that is, and I don't know, especially if we have a community service requirement for our high schoolers, why we can't have a couple high schoolers and maybe a volunteer teacher or somebody who's willing to like oversee that. But like, I, you know, thankfully have kids that are willing to be bribed with Halloween candy. But going forward, you know, with this process, with leadership boards, with, you know, wanting people to get involved, like, I would love to get involved and be on some of these boards. But I can't always bring my kids until 8 o'clock at night and let them color on my legs, especially when it's not short season. You know, I just feel like I'm very impassioned about this, but I also feel like when I look around a room that's a community information session, and there are it's a small turnout. I'm so glad people are here, but also I don't see any of my fellow, you know, school parents that I know are really passionate about what happens at their school. I don't see them here, and I know that it's because A, the timing of this kind of stinks for parents who are getting out of work and taking their kids home and feeding them dinner and putting them to bed, and also B, if we talk about the poverty level in town, there is not the possibility that the families in this town are able to pay for a child care provider to watch their kids so that they can come and be involved. So I feel like
put that down for the next time we should have some
for as we go forward for any of this type of meeting, or for the leadership meetings, or for any of this.
Putney's on it.
I'm typing away. Yes, thank you. Like, that's my plea and my beg for all parents. Like, you'll get more involvement.
Is there any other comments?
Thanks.
Over here, George.
I've heard you, we're talking about the PICUS money, and I heard you talking about what the board's going to do and what we're going to do. I think you several times used the personal pronoun, and you may well be on that mega board.
No, I'm not running.
But, okay, well, you make my point. We've sat here tonight and talked about assurances of what this new huge mega board is going to do. But in fact, it doesn't exist. We don't know who's going to be on it. We don't know what its philosophy will be. We don't know whether it will be per education and spend over the limit, or whether it's going to cut everything to the bone. That's to me, that's one of the largest unknowns, finances aside. One of the largest unknowns is what this huge board is going to be like and what it's going to do. We know what our local school board does. The towns know what their boards do. We have no idea what this new thing's going to do.
If I may, George. I think about this when we started talking about this unified board and everything else. I mean, I actually got involved in this because I was on the BUHS board when it was 17 members, and that was an unwieldy board. and the voters voted to shrink that size to 9. So, and I thought that was important for this unified board, whatever going forward, to be a manageable number. And 9 is where we ended up. So I think of it very much like the high school board. The high school board right now is made up of folks from 5 towns. It's based on population. Brattleboro has the largest structure of that. And yeah, we could do what you're saying, you know, the board could come in and they could decide we're going to cut everything to the bone or we're going to add all these new things. Any board could do that, you know. So I think that this, you use the term mega board, I think, and I don't see it as a mega board. I see it as 9 people. And having been on a board of 9 people for the better part of the last 15 years, I've seen how we've worked together really well and taken into consideration things from the administration, from the teachers, from parents, from the people we talk to in the community about what's in the best interest of the kids that we are governed with educating. And I would think, and I think Jill, you said it the other night at the meeting that was in Dummerston, that nobody goes into being on a school board for anything other than doing what is in the best interest of the kids in that community. And I think in this regard, related to Act 46 and the merger, is our community is just getting bigger. But hopefully we'll be attracting people that are in it for what's in the best interest of those kids, of all of those kids.
Your operative word is hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, because we don't know, but you don't know.
You're doing a great job, and so are the boards in the other town. If it ain't broke, you know, don't fix it.
Unfortunately, that was not an option under the law. It's not an option under the law to tell the state to tough.
No, but we have the alternative government structures to keep those current boards.
Maybe, maybe not, because as was pointed out earlier, that may not be an option either. It could be that they come in and tell us what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, when we're going to do it. We don't know. So as Jill said earlier too, we came up with something hopefully that gives us as the community the power.
I wonder if the town finance committee wanted to make some comments on they've been studying this.
Where do you want?
Maybe over there.
I'm Franz Reichsman, the chair of the Brattleboro Representative Town Meeting Finance Committee. And we have been talking about Act 46 for a while now. It's been a little bit hard to get up to speed, but I think we've come up with a variety of points of view offered by a variety of different people in the community. And at our meeting tonight, which was just before this meeting, we have adopted a position of the Finance Committee on the proposed merger. So, an analysis of the proposed Act 46 Study Committee School Merger Plan, Brattleboro Representative Town Meeting Finance Committee, November 1st, 2017. Brattleboro Representative Town Meeting Finance Committee has examined the school district merger proposed by the Act 46 Study Committee. We have heard from those supporting this merger as well as those opposing it. While we have analyzed the likely effects of the proposed merger through a financial lens, we recognize that the educational and operational aspects of Act 46 are the primary concerns. We do not recommend a vote based solely on financial considerations. On November 7th, 2017, voters in Brattleboro, Putney, Dummerston, and Guilford will vote on the question of merging the 4-town school districts into one, also including BUHS BAMS and the Wyndham Regional Career Center. Our findings are as follows. 1, there are significant financial benefits if this merger is approved. For the next 4 years, there would be decreases in the homestead tax rate. Additionally, some schools in the new district would receive state grants based on their size, and funds would be provided to offset the costs of the merger. 2, the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union has estimated the savings for the taxpayers to be $1.9 million over the next 4 years. In our opinion, however, this estimate should be adjusted downward because of the income sensitivity provision of the education property tax for those with incomes household incomes up to $140,000. Very roughly, the downward adjustment might be on the order of $0.3 million down to $1.6 million. 3, the tax benefits listed above will take effect if the merger is approved by the voters on November 7th. If the merger is not approved, the state's implementation plans under Act 46 will continue with a target date of July 1st, 2019, but without any tax benefits. We think it is more likely than not that the state will implement a reorganization plan similar to or the same as the current proposed merger. Therefore, it would be financially beneficial to taxpayers to approve the plan now rather than end up with the same plan but no tax benefits. 4, the tax benefits for Brattleboro may be decreased because of the difference in current educational property tax rates in the 4 towns. We believe, however, this conclusion and any calculations based on it are uncertain due to the complexity of the school funding formula and due to potential budgetary savings under the proposed merger. 5, potential budgetary savings are themselves projections based in part on prior experience locally, e.g. with merging special education budgets at the WSESU, and in other school districts, those already merged under Act 46. The WSESU projects at least a 1% overall decrease in aggregate school spending if the districts are merged. Proponents of an alternative plan disagree and think no long-term savings are likely. 6, while it's possible that an alternate governance structure may emerge, time is limited to submit it for approval by the state. The deadline for submission is December 26, 2017. As of this writing, there is no specific plan from those opposing the Act 46 Study Committee proposal. The financial effects of any such plan are unknown, while the tax benefits are guaranteed if the merger is approved now. 7, unforeseen and expensive events over the course of the proposed merger are of concern, but a unified district would be more adept at handling staffing challenges and operational gaps. 8, the Brattleboro Town Finance Committee sees significant financial benefits if voters approve this merger on November 7th, 2017. That's the end of the statement. I just want to emphasize that we are not advocating and have taken no position on the actual merger. Our analysis is limited to financial aspects of the merger, and there are equally or more important aspects for all the voters to consider before casting their vote. Thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none. 1.
I'll ask a question. One thing that's been in the back of my mind because other people have brought it up, and I don't want to get bogged down too much in history, but part of the opposition to the merger is based in history. Was there an opportunity for this study committee to engage a consultant who would have been a neutral person in this process, engaging the public, and a decision was made not to work with a state grant that would enable you to work with a consultant on the process?
Alice, can we answer that as a chair? I don't remember that. I know we talked about it in the beginning and then we determined not to do that. I don't remember us actually having a motion to vote down a potential grant.
Because that question came to me from someone in a neighboring district that's been working on this issue that made use of a state grant to hire a consultant, and they were curious why the process here had not engaged the public in a more effective way. I know we can argue whether those of us that are opposed to this merger have been heard. I guarantee you, if you were sitting in my seat, you would feel unheard. So that's just been a question I've been wanting to ask. Why the perception for me has been that the preferred merger was the goal. Other things may have been looked at, but it's been pretty much on that track from the beginning. And people who were trying to move it or find out what possible paths were going have kind of felt frustrated and not having a level playing field to throw up other options. And that's, I think, part of where the roots of the frustration and essentially the division, which is unfortunate, because what we've done is divide people who support public education through this process. And I think we're going into November 7th with a large number of people in this area who support public education who are fighting with one another.
So I'd like
And,
to respond.
and I would say that my last thing, and I won't say another word tonight, is there have been several lengthy editorials from this committee, representing this committee in the paper over the last 3 weeks, that I think really unfairly characterize the opposition, and it has not served your purposes and your goals. I will say that.
So we were offered to clarify, we did take advantage of one grant which could have, the money could have been put towards a lawyer or a consultant, and I do remember that we determined that a lawyer was the way the committee wanted to go. This committee is a statute-based committee. This is to return to your larger question. We're a statute-based committee which has had very clear guidelines and rules. One of the rules is that as of the vote on November 7th, once those votes are certified, we no longer function. The reason we were formed was to consider whether a merger of 5 towns and then 4 towns was worthy of consideration of the voters. That was our task, that was our mandate. During that process, because we did hear, you might not feel like you were heard, and I'm someone who totally gets that you do not feel like you were heard. I'm someone who did hear you. I think all of us heard you. And so during the process of always keeping the merger on the table, because we legally had to, because that was our task, we did look. We veered off and looked at the other options. And as Jill referred to earlier, we constantly brought these other options back to the table, either in just a comment or two, or a 5 to 10 minute conversation. But I get it. You know, the law is very clear. We as a committee have a job to do, and it's the democratic process, and it really is an issue that perhaps all of us should be talking to the folks about up in Montpelier about, because we weren't given many options. You and I can debate about that. There's no value in that. I think the positions on either side are clear, but us as school board members who were appointed to this committee had a job, and I actually think we did it reasonably well. And unfortunately, this is not unique in the state of Vermont. There's a lot of tension. There are a lot of communities have been ripped apart. Many of us feel that we just wish that we had been told what we had to do directly, rather than through this 50-page law, which directed us pretty clearly that our communities needed to ultimately consider this. And so we're now at the stage of having spent 2 years, and the electorate can decide. And then we'll go from there. Or we won't go from there. You know, other people will. The Board of Ed will go from there. So, Spoon.
We have I'm not sure what the character is. There's something called a social contract. A social contract is the agreement that a group of people make about how they will lead their lives. We know them in American culture, in American society, as under the words of constitutions, charters, bylaws, and the like. I think what fails in this Act 46 is that the social contract, the agreement, doesn't achieve the standards that we would. It's not, the agreement simply takes small districts and mimics the same thing in a larger agreement. There is nothing in it that's progressive, that leads to change, that addresses the needs that people are really feeling. And that is, how do we educate children to try and fix this world? There could be a lot in that agreement that addresses measurements, curriculums, board education, and any number of other things that would be sort of the seeds and the jumping off place for change. So if there is any reason at all to vote this down, it's simply to be able to go back and redo that agreement and make it more responsive to the needs we have today. I don't think any longer we should be educating kids for today's jobs. We need to be educating kids to understand the world that they live in and the threats that they face and feel empowered to do something about it.
Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Early in the screen thing, you don't have to try and find it, you pointed out that the merger was being put together and that somehow it was just a phrase up there, that it was based on the concerns of the community. I'm wondering how that was determined, and I guess, as part of my editorial comment, what I found very disturbing in the last couple of months that I've been following what's been going on is the number of people that I've spoken to that I was bringing them new news. That there was a large aspect of only in very recent, the last week or two, when there have been so many things in the newspaper, there were so many people out there didn't even know there was an issue. So I'm wondering how you determine the concerns of the various communities.
Amy, go for it.
So we had a lot of concerns shared with us in Dummerston. As a study committee, we had numerous opportunities for public comment. We took various versions of the Articles of Agreement back to our local school boards for feedback. And I know I personally carried them to the study committee in the list form, item by item, going through, including this last version that we ended up approving and submitting to the state. So, there was a lot of feedback that way. I don't know that we can control engagement. I think the study committee has made many, many attempts to engage. That's why BCTV is here. That's why we have all the information.
So we had in the same thing, every single study committee meeting was on BCTV, was in the paper, was open to the public. We took public comment. Andy was at many of them. Many of you were at many of them.
We were meeting in different communities.
We met in different communities on purpose all the time. We circled around. We had it at the town meeting 2 times, because we had 2 town meetings that we've gone through in this 2-year process, and had discussion both times and took back concerns. We had public forums. There was one that was very well attended here at the beginning. People had specific concerns. We took something back on the membership, the amount of members from Brattleboro and we took that back and had that discussion at the about the leadership councils. I mean, there's specific things even inside the Articles of Agreement that we changed based on people's suggestions and comments and concerns. And then the local school boards, at every single one of our meetings, it's been on the agenda, and we give an update and a report, and the school board members can give their concerns.
And then there's also those grocery store conversations and hardware store conversations. You, as individual members, we...
The soccer fields,
yep,
lacrosse fields, football game.
Soccer.
Soccer.
Oh, did you say soccer?
Soccer. Anybody else? We're getting close on 2 hours, and that's the maximum that I think we should be here. I think we all turn into pumpkins. All right, then thank you for coming out. Voting is on Tuesday. You can vote now. However, early voting is open.
Yes, is there a motion to?
I need Robin. Can you make an adjournment motion?
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Spoon, would you like to second to adjourn? All of us in favor? Aye. We're done. Yes. David, this one.